both operating in capital. The environmental services and protection services, both operating in capital. And with council's indulgence, I would ask that we move protection services to the top, if that's okay with everyone. And we will be doing operating first, which is on page 76 of your notes. So, Chief, the floor is yours.
Oh, there it is. Beautiful. Thank you very much. And just get right to it, I guess. I got this a little bit out of order, so I'll hit the capital first because there's only one item for 2020. The one of the rooftop heating units has reached its end of life and requires some serious attention. Had a quote to get that done. Excuse me, and it's going to come in a little under $15,000. So that's the only capital item budget we have for this year. We moved a couple out a year or so just so we could try to hit the target. So that's the only capital item budget that we have. On to the operating budget. I just wanted to hit a few highlights about the town of Cobourg. Since 1991, we've added approximately 5,500 residential units in this town, believe it or not. Huge number. The population of the town has increased by 23% since that time. And our emergency responses have increased from 448 in 1995, I couldn't find a number for 1991, to 1,666 last year in 2018. So you can see the town continues to grow, and so does our number of responses. Another interesting number that I pulled out is, as of October 24th of this year, we've had simultaneous calls 64 times. So that's at least 2 calls going on at the same time. That was to October 24th. Interestingly enough, yesterday we had it happen twice yesterday, that we had 2 simultaneous calls. So we were very busy, and that's just the times we're living in. So our full-time suppression firefighting staff levels have remained the same since 1991. So we have 12 full-time firefighters divided up into 4 platoons, so 3 on each platoon, and that's been the same since 1991. Our full-time staff also fulfill the role of firefighter inspector, so a lot of times when they have time, they can be out doing fire prevention inspections, whether it's in the downtown core, residential, industrial, all the different occupancies. So they're all cross-trained to do both jobs. Unfortunately, with the call volume, we've had to go from being proactive to reactive and just doing requests and complaints. We also have pending legislation coming down on firefighter certification. We know it's coming, we're just not sure when. So we've been proactive in the last couple of years, and we're moving towards certification for all of our staff, and that takes up a lot of time and a lot of man hours. So that is cutting into our firefighter inspector program as well. So like I said earlier, we need to get back to doing proactive inspections, but with our current staffing level and our call volumes and everything else, training levels, we just can't get there right now. So what we're asking for, or what we're looking for this year, is to add a 1 full-time firefighter to be added to our complement. That equates to 1.3% increase in the budget. We will be asking for 1 additional firefighter. If we're successful this year, we'll be coming back the next 3 years so that we can put 1 additional firefighter on each platoon to bring us up to 4, so that we can handle these simultaneous calls, so that we can get back to doing some proactive fire prevention inspections and continue with our certification training that we're working towards. So that aside, the anticipated contractual obligations that we have for this year and some very minor line item adjustments. That equates to 1.5%. So we're looking at a total increase of 2.8% increase in the budget, which in dollar cents on a $3 million budget, it comes out to $26,500 over the 1.9% target. So that's the fire department side of the house. On the emergency management side of the house, last year our emergency planner was moved from non-union over into QP, and with that came a significant salary adjustment, and so that means that this year we're looking at a 9% increase in the budget, which is a total of $12,003. And probably about 11,000 of that is salary adjustment. So it's a 9% increase, but it's basically out of our control on that one. So it's about $140,000 total budget. So somewhat on the dollar side of things, it's minor, but and that's my presentation. But I'm here to answer questions. So.
I think that was a pretty good summary, and I understand as I look through your budget that those are the two items that came out. There's not much we can do about pay equity, I understand, and certainly from the stats you gave us, the extra firefighter will come in handy, and I guess it'll all depend on when we get down to budget deliberations whether or not that will be successful or not. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from members of council for the fire chief? Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Chief. One of my first questions in your requests of complement, could you at some point, I know this may be confidential, depending on how you present, I know we have some retirements coming up potentially in our term. I'd like to better understand through this process how those retirements may assist council towards the complement. So I realize we're talking personnel, so that may have to happen in that room behind us, but that would certainly give me a better understanding of what's coming versus your request.
I'm not sure if I 100% understand where you're going with that.
Okay, through the chair, if you tell me you have someone retiring which leaves an opening, mm-hmm. then the question I want to ask, if that opening fills your complement on one, then would you be asking? So to me, I want to see the shift out and the shift in versus, I don't know that.
Okay, I think I got it now through you, Deputy Mayor. So when a full-time firefighter retires, we automatically backfill. That's not a new position. Okay, so somebody will move up into that role, and then we'll bring a volunteer in to backfill that position, and then we hire a volunteer to start. So there's no new bodies there. There's new people, but not new positions. What we're asking for is a new position. So in essence, we'd be going from 12 full-time firefighters, suppression firefighters, to 13. And then in 2021, we'd be looking for the 14th and 15th in the following year and the 16th. So we'd be up to 16 full-time in 4 years' time from the 12 we are right now. So there'd be 4 additional bodies in 4 years. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, just for clarity for me, besides the backfilling, so what you're doing is you're hoping to gain 1 complement per platoon, then over a 4-year period you gain the 4, so then it becomes a 4x4. Do I have it right?
Correct.
Okay, thank
you. To go along with that, excuse me, there is a somewhat of a cost savings in that when you bring people in, a new person into the full-time ranks, you're bringing them in at a reduced rate. So a 4th-class firefighter comes in at 60%, and then as they move up the ranks, they get another percentage. So there is a little bit of cost savings there, but so.
Follow-up? Go ahead.
If I may, well, I'll wait to go on the sheet, so thank you.
And a question, oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Darling. Your opening slide, you talked about an increase in population. The last two censuses, we basically have gone up 1% a year, or 5%. So with the requests going down the road for the next 3 years, is that based on a potential increase in population, or is that just basically workload from within?
Yeah.
And explain that again to me a little bit as to why now versus you have 12, you will have 13 if this is approved, and then going forward, what those extra bodies will be doing?
Okay, so this ask is not new. We've been asking for this for a few years, but at budget review sessions, it gets taken out. So this is the first year we've actually got to council with the request for a new body. The population increase of 23% was over that period of 30 years. Right? So it is, 1-2% a year. But it's still an increase in population, an increase of, like I said, 5,500 residential units alone. That's not businesses, that's not industry. That doesn't include the traffic that we deal with on a daily basis, the 401 rail. So what we're looking for is an extra body, so that sometimes when we have these multiple calls, we can split the shift. We can split 2 off and go here, 2 off and go there. We still are backed up by our volunteers, but you can imagine being a volunteer business person with volunteer staff, and these people leaving 3 and 4 times a day to go out to answer emergency calls. It gets taxing, and it's getting harder and harder to find local businesses that are letting their people respond to calls. That has forced us to look farther afield with our volunteers. They're working in Port Hope. They're working out. They work out as a contractor, for instance. It could be anywhere in Northumberland County or farther afield during the day. So we lose those bodies. So we really need to ramp up the full-time side so that we can offset the loss of our volunteers. So the training requirements that we're forced to not forced yet, but we're going to be forced to be certified, have everybody certified as an NFPA 1001 and firefighter. Those training requirements are substantial, so we have to keep that in mind when we're scheduling people, sending them to Trenton or to the Fire College in Gravenhurst or wherever. We have to have bodies to backfill them when we're sending these people out to be trained. So it's a challenge, and that's why we're looking for some help.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Darling?
Excuse me. I guess through you, Madam Chair, to the Chief, I guess I have a little bit of a better understanding of how it works. Have you found it difficult to meet the 10 and 10? And by that what I mean is having 10 firefighters on scene in 10 minutes with expanding the area you're getting your volunteers from. Are we still meeting that criteria?
Through you, Madam Chair, the 10 and 10 is gone.
Okay.
We don't have to follow that criteria anymore. But if it was still in play, it would be very difficult to be hitting that number. Yeah.
So I'm thinking you're having difficulty getting volunteers to the scene
it is difficult,
in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone in this room that the traffic in this town is getting crazier by the day. So when those volunteers have to leave work and get to a scene, it takes time, and it adds to the time that we need on scene. When you get on scene of an incident, there's certain things that have to happen in a timely manner, and if you don't have bodies to do it, the incident grows until you get the bodies to do it. So you're right. The number, the old 10 and 10, it would be very hard for us to be meeting that.
Thank you.
With the complement we have today.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the chief? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in today, and we look forward to another year with exceptional service.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I move on to protection services, I was waiting for Councillor Chorley to arrive to ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest from any member of council. No? Okay, thank you. So we'll go up to the top of the agenda. Director Wills, are you ready to walk us through? So we're going to do, would you do operating or capital first? It's a little less painful. So Public Works operating starts on page 104. You've got them everything in front of you? 104. The first page is engineering administration, just to make it easy at the top.
Okay.
So if everybody's ready, go ahead,
Ready?
Director Wills.
Okay, so engineering admin. You'll notice right off the bat the top line is a little bit different than our 2019 budget. It's been reduced, and this is because we have a public works inspector who was 50% allocated to engineering last year, but we were successful in getting a new engineering tech last year, and so now I'm able to move that inspector over to roads and sewers again. We were anticipating sharing that person under engineering because we do need that extra field work help, but with our new engineering tech, we're able to give this public works inspector back to the roads and sewers department where they should be in the first place. So that's why there's a reduction here, and you'll see that 50% person back in the roads and sewers department later on in the budget here. And the other 50% is in environmental services, and that's how it was last year too. The next one to note, just a really small increase in office equipment purchases. We've had some MOL, Ministry of Labor, ergonomics training this year in our department for public works specifically, so I'm anticipating just a little bit of extra office equipment to bring some of our office stations up to better ergonomic standards. Next one to note, the special project for downtown Christmas lights, note that it has been zeroed out, so that budget has been moved over to special events. Just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that that's what we were doing. The next special project, next one, special project accessibility. So this is something, this is the first page, handout number 1 of your packages. And I've just made reference to the terms of reference for our local boards and advisory committees about budgeting for our committees. In the past 2 years, we've had sort of a placeholder for accessibility. 1 year was 50,000 and last year was 20,000. But we haven't had the work plans that we made this year, which I think are a great thing moving forward. And according to our terms of reference, we really should be having those work plans go towards budget items or work towards budget items. And if the advisory committee comes up with something that they want to pitch to council, same as what we do for our what we're doing right now, then maybe that's the time that the budget is allotted to those groups, depending on how much they need or want for their project. So I have taken it out, but by all means, we can leave it in. It was 20,000 last year. I've just wanted to make note that there isn't a plan yet to spend that 20,000, so it's a placeholder that takes away from the bottom line of other needs that might be higher priorities for you.
Director Wills, Councillor Bureau, and do you have a question as well? No, okay. So Councillor Bureau has a question.
Yeah, just a question on the Christmas lights as well as banners. Would it still not be in your budget because it's your department that does put them up and take them down?
Sorry, the contracted ones we don't. So the ones
Right.
that, and then the wrapping of the poles is part of our operations, so it doesn't have a special line item.
Okay, thank you.
Different ones.
Go ahead.
And just going back to the accessibility one, I have the same sort of summary when it comes to the Transportation Advisory Committee as well, and it shows up in it as a capital project. And then we'll talk about that later. So special project Brook Creek flood reduction study. This is something that's been on our back burner for quite some time. It keeps getting pushed back every year, and we think it's about time we get it done already. We've had the first phase of it done by the GRCA probably quite some time ago. That had recommendations for the second phase of this, and this is just to come up with a master plan of how we can reduce flooding in Brook Creek way further upstream, so that we can, once we have this master plan in place and understand what it's going to cost and what's involved in potentially reducing the flooding in Brook Creek, then we'll have something ready in case funding comes around, or we can start budgeting for that capital works in the future.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on that, Director. When you say Brook Creek Phase 2, just for my learning, is that the north end above King or the sort of what I might call the south end, the opposite side of King? I'm just curious.
It's not actually related to the location, it's the creek in general, but we're calling it phase 2 because the first phase was sort of a preliminary, very quick overview by GRCA, just to sort of outline what the issues are, and then out of that came recommendations to do an actual engineering study for the whole watershed of Brook Creek.
If I can ask a subsequent question for that, just because the number of calls I am getting, I know Brook Creek also runs through the ministry property. If this were to happen based on engineering and GRC by your rights and responsibilities, do you have a right to get access to that property through that? Because I'm finding in past from residents it's an extremely frustrating situation. We can't seem to get access to the ministry property, and I'm just wondering, when you do these studies, will you be granted that type of access?
Are you referring to the Brookside? So this would be even further upstream of that, and it would be involving online stormwater management ponds upstream of those issues to help hold back the waters for longer periods of time and release it slower so that we don't have that concentration way further downstream.
Director Wills, before we leave this page, I understand there's probably a lot of accounting entries to bring your year-to-date for 2019 up to what it historically has been. Is that your assumption as well? Because you're looking at only 78,000 versus an ask of in the budget of 311.
Mostly it's related to our labor. And yes, what we budgeted last year would have been higher because we would have had the inspector in there, which is now in roads and sewers, and we haven't yet hired that second engineering tech. So we will be actually quite a bit lower in 2019. But it looks like it is mostly labor related.
So the difference of that position will be reflected somewhere else in your budget, I'm assuming?
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Charlie?
Thank you. I just want to revisit the accessibility special project line that you mentioned earlier, and the budget is 0 for 2020. I'm just wondering how the motion that council passed last night, which was endorsing the Accessibility Committee's desire to organize a downtown accessibility awareness experience event in May 2020. Does that mean, where would the budget for that event come from, or would we need to put something into that line?
Yes, that was something that, sorry, through the chair to to Councillor Chorley. I would anticipate them having to ask for an amount. We don't have any budget or idea of what that event might cost, but that might be something to put in a smaller amount than the 20, like maybe reduce it to 5,000 this year and then see how it goes, because that's more of a smaller operating cost like we have for all the rest of our sort of known costs for the year. That could be something that would work.
No other questions? We can move on.
So, moving to GIS on page 107. Just wanted to provide an update on the statement of purpose. It's been a long time since that's been updated, and our GIS coordinator provided me a bit of a write-up I wouldn't mind reading, just so everyone's aware of what she's up to and for who. So GIS was implemented through a strategic plan beginning in 2004, with hiring of staff taking place in 2007. The staff person in the department carries out maintenance and expansion of the system and consolidation of spatial data into one corporate repository. GIS is a corporate service which all departments benefit from through in-house base mapping, mapping of assets and thematic data sets, web maps, hard copy maps, data queries, data analysis, reporting, and larger solutions like our CityWorks program and ArcGIS Online. We also have Survey 123, which is how we do our streetlight maintenance reporting now. Collector and story maps, which was the presentation you would have seen last year on our asset management plan. So every department from clerks, finance, building, planning, community services, parks, urban forestry, public works, engineering, economic development, fire and police receive support, services, and products from GIS. The in-house base mapping is used directly in fire dispatch and indirectly for dispatch through third parties for police and ambulance services. So there's a whole lot involved with GIS, and I just wanted to make everyone aware of.
Just as a follow-up to that, Mr. Davey, those specific corporate departments, are they all charged back for the work from GIS? Does that all remain in your budget from year to year?
Yes, Deputy Mayor. The GIS would be like a service department similar to other departments. They're there, like they provide service to all other town departments. There's no charge back.
We do have one from building. Building department gets charged back for the permitting. It's about $5,700.
Can you tell us a little bit about this special project, air photos?
Yes.
It's in there.
So this is something that our GIS coordinator is very interested in doing, and right now it's with the county. So through the county Northumberland GIS Co-op, they are preparing, as part of their budget, a 10-centimeter resolution photo of aerial photo. The problem for the county is that because they're so big, it's a very expensive capital item for them. It's going to be something like $40,000 or $50,000 for them to do it, and because we're so small, it's only $500 for our portion. So we win, but they may very likely not get it approved by in their budget. So she had looked into other costs in case this is something we want to do on our own. Our arborist would really appreciate it in the Parks Department to have a leaf on to see where all the actual tree canopy is, and it would also help the Parks Department to see green during, this is normally aerial photos are all when the leaves are off and you can't see the green grass, but it would help them to see their parks when they're actually active. But the cost for that for 10 centimeters on our own is $10,000. And if you want to do a 5-centimeter aerial photo, which is what Peterborough has, it's $12,000. If anyone's interested in looking at Peterborough's website, the photos are spectacular, but they do a leaf on and leaf off every year. And but anyway, just for food for thought, just so everyone knows how much that costs. But If the county's project goes through, it's only $500 for us.
I like the sound of $500 better.
It's well worth it, I think. So the only other thing on this page is the student payroll. Last year, we had a student. Let me just get my student. That was under GIS. And they mostly did work for Parks and Public Works. So we're actually allocating half of each of the salary again this year, but from Parks and Public Works instead of out of GIS. I think I touched a little bit on this at some point in the past of what this student did. She was sort of a summer administrative student that Mel oversaw to help with utilizing our City Works program for when people call and want a response back or want to request a special service request. She would enter all the information and then it gets sent to the proper staff member instead of shifting them around and giving them a new phone number and saying, oh, maybe it's this person, you can go talk to them, and then they get to that department, it's the wrong person, and they get bumped around. So this was a really successful pilot. Just for your awareness, forestry really benefited from this. The student entered service requests immediately when they received a phone call, which he gets a lot, and he's out in the field a lot, so he's constantly checking his voicemails, but instead she was able to collect this information for him and put it right into the computer. So all Rory had to do was call the person back, make the appointment, and then close out the work order. Otherwise, he's usually into December, or if not later, finishing up all of these work orders because he doesn't have time to actually input them himself. So in comparison, last year, he did 583 tree inspections up until late September, and at the same time this year, because of our student, he was able to do 917. So it really increased his efficiency as far as doing the actual inspections of the trees. And for Parks and Public Works, again, they tracked all of the questions that were asked over the phone and created service requests for City Works when people requested follow-up on an issue. The student collected as much info on the request as possible to best be able to fill out the service request and dispatch it to the appropriate person. For staff receiving a service request, it's most helpful to have a good summary of the issue upon receiving the service request so that the follow-up is more efficient, as the info does not have to be collected by a second person and the public are not having to explain it twice. So the student created 325 service requests in 4 months, when in 2017 there had only been 219 in that same time period. Also, during the same time period, 282 service requests were created by other staff, indicating, which was very noticeable around our office, is that she was out and about telling people how to do this properly. So we had an increase in the rest of us, all also opening up more service requests and using the system better. To date, we have 612 service requests, which is more than double than past numbers. The summer student tracked 800 phone calls, 325 service requests were created, and the rest were recorded in a spreadsheet for us to have a frequently asked question list, and I'll be working with Ashley to maybe post some of these questions on our website. Associated with the frequently asked question list was a typical response and also the contact information for the appropriate redirection. So when you wouldn't create a service request, she's created a list of who should I direct this to, or she can answer the question herself because they were such common questions. So we plan to finalize that spreadsheet internally to distribute amongst all of our frontline staff who typically answer the phone. What was not tracked was the calls that were transferred directly to the staff if the person did not want to create a service request, but she was also able to start answering questions even about transit as she became familiar with the system, and typical questions that were, those type of questions were not tracked. Work order is a secondary process that often comes as a result of the follow-up of the service request. Typically, a work order is created by the actual staff member who receives the service request, as they know who best to actually assign it to, which is generally, it might be a general utility worker to go out and fix a sign or something like that. But as the time went on, the student was familiar enough to know who these things should be addressed to, so she was able to actually create the work order, so it saved one extra step. So needless to say, it was very valuable for us to have in the summer, and that's why I'm pitching to have it again this year. And it's only $8,400, to which 42 will be out of parks and 42 will be out of the public works budget.
Can you just explain, on your student payroll salaries and wages, your budget in 19 was $9,900. your budget in 2020 is 1,000?
Yes, that's because we're planning to recover the student payroll this year out of Parks and Public Works instead of GIS.
Okay.
So last year it came right out of GIS, all of
Okay.
it was.
Any questions before we leave this page? Councillor Chorley?
I'm just wondering, is that same individual going to be available for this role, or would it be a new individual?
I don't know that yet. We would hope so. She was really great, but we don't know yet. So the next item to note is hardware maintenance and server hosting. It's about $2,000 more this year. And this is to create, this is a bit of a contingency for her hardware and server hosting. We're usually she's anticipating being within the 9250 as it was last year, but the extra 2,000, if it's left over and we don't have to spend it, then it will go into a computer reserve for herself. The GIS computers are really expensive, and they're replaced every 5 years or so. And when that happens, it sort of depletes the actual IT computer reserve. So having her own reserve keeps her, allows her to at least have her own budget for when those computers come up for replacement. As long as our maintenance stays under the 11.4, of course. And if we have to spend it all based on maintenance, then nothing goes to the SO reserve.
I'm not seeing a reserve for the GIS.
That's correct. It's new.
It's new?
We'd be creating it this year if there's anything left in that.
If there's
account.
anything left, you'll put it in there.
Yep. That is it for GIS. So roads and sewers, page 111. The first line item, you'll see an increase there. And that's for the half inspector. And also I am proposing an additional general utility worker this year. So I've created a bit of a staff justification report. That's your handout number 2 in the package that I gave you. And a brief overview just on sort of summarizing what might be in that report. In 2019, we had an additional seasonal employee was approved by council to assist with improving the timeliness of clearing sidewalks in the winter. So that just would have been for the winter months, seasonal. We're working on a procedure as to how staff will be utilized this coming winter to make it happen, to make this happen. In 2020, we're proposing a full-time person be added instead of a seasonal employee. The reason being is that we also need the extra help in the summer. The number of general utility workers has not increased in over 30 years, when the town had nearly half the amount of roads to maintain and plow. The same number of plow trucks and maintenance and vehicles may exist, but in today's work environment, work does not progress as quickly as it once did due to strict rules regarding driving times, which is the hours of service, documentation, and higher levels of expected service. The town is subject to much liability for not addressing deficient infrastructure, including potholes and tripping hazards, more than ever before. And we spend a lot of time inspecting, tracking, documenting, and repairing these small deficiencies to protect the town from litigation and from public injury. I've prepared the staff justification report that shows a breakdown of how our general utility workers have been distributed, how their hours have been distributed amongst all of the many maintenance activities required on an annual basis. There's a big pie chart in there. And I'm trying to do that again for this year's data. You'll see that many of the tasks have barely any hours associated with them, meaning that we have a wide variety of things to do and spend very little time on them, such as the trimming of trees, ditching, trimming around intersections for sight lines. Lots of little tasks. At any given time of the year, we have almost 20% of our staff are off, either on vacation, sick, leave, banked hours, and this is equivalent to 3 full-time staff at any given time, and it brings us actually down to 10 people. And this year was even a little bit worse because we had someone leave, we had a retirement, and we had someone off on extended medical leave. 2 people on extended medical leave. So in the summer months, we are overly short-staffed as the bank time from the winter. They get a lot of overtime in the winter hours, obviously, for snow plowing, and they're only The QP agreement we have with them allows them only one person to be off at a time in the winter, so all that banked time is used up in the summer. So we have a lot of time, people off in the summertime. And also in that same report, I've prepared a summary of the percentage of time our department believes should be dedicated to each task to increase our level of service. These determinations are made by operations staff who understand where our shortfalls are due to staff time limitations. The main deficient tasks include storm sewer and stormwater maintenance, which we do next to nothing of. Sanitary, flushing, and CCTV, so cammering, flushing all our sanitary sewers and cammering them. We do this every year, and we're supposed to do the whole town on a 1/5 every year, so it's a 5-year cycle, and we can't keep up with that, that cycle anymore. As well as winter maintenance is in need of extra time. Currently, we hardly do any storm sewer maintenance, which I just mentioned. Catch basins are cleared out whenever the Vector truck and staff are available, or on a complaint basis, rather than on an annual preventative schedule. Storm sewers should be flushed and cambered regularly, just the same as sanitary sewers should. And our condition assessment of storm sewers for our asset management plan is just based on the installation date and material of storm sewers. So we actually have no idea of what condition those storm sewers are in because we've never looked at them. If we could increase time spent on these maintenance tasks, it would ensure that all storm sewers were flushed of debris and catch basins cleaned out on a 5-year schedule, same as the sanitary sewers. The sanitary sewers, oh, I've already mentioned that, sorry. The sweeper truck also helps keep the catch basins clear of debris for rainfall events, and we try to keep that sweeper operational for 8 months of the year. As much as possible, as long as there's not snow on the ground, that truck should be out clearing the gutters. And we're doing a pretty good job at that. But again, this is something that it's not as high a priority as others, so if we need that person, they come off the truck and the sweeper isn't running when it should be. We do also use that sweeper for private developments to address complaints when there's dust and debris on the roads in the developments, and the developer is supposed to maintain those, and when they don't, we have to take our truck off of our roads, put them on the developers, clean up their site, and then we charge them back for that. So the comparison of actual versus ideal shows a deficit of 5 staff. As Cobra continues to grow and roads come online as municipal property, the demand for maintenance staff and equipment should continually grow with it. This exercise has been undertaken to support the need for immediate growth in the Roads and Sewers Department and to plan for future staffing requirements based on actual growth once it's realized. So you'll see that once you read the report, it's sort of based on per kilometers, what it used to be back in the day and what it is now and what it probably should be. If we can work towards a per kilometer, as roads come online, that indicates when we need to do a staffing increase. But right now we're in a deficit, so I'd like to try and catch up. That's all on that
Quick
issue.
question. When I was looking at this page, the overall difference from budget to 2020 ask is $187,232, so 8.7% increase. And looking at your staffing, that's $162,132. Is that a big chunk of that? So I guess there's really no other way of reducing that 8.7 given what you've just said, I'm guessing.
Right. I guess the only thing I can offset that with is that the other 0.5% that was in engineering before is part of that 8.7 increase. So if I had left the inspector in the engineering department, they would have had a lesser, the roads and sewers would have had a lesser increase. So it's the same person. They were already budgeted for. It's just now they're showing up in roads and sewers. Makes it look worse.
So we'll see a reduction then when we get to that page.
That was the engineering one.
That's
It
the
was a
engineering,
reduction.
okay. Okay, so that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, balances out a little bit. Oh, and also, sorry, the casual person is also reduced from this roads and sewers. So normally we always hire someone for the winter, and if we were to get a full-time person, we would not hire the casual, so that reduces the salary as well.
That's already been taken out?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for Director Wills on this page? Okay, go ahead.
Couple of small little ones on the same page, page 111. Memberships and subscriptions, you'll notice, is $2,700 up from $900. This was mostly our Ontario Good Roads Association is a $1,500 annual fee that used to be paid out of the CIO's office. So that's now in roads and sewers. and also property improvements. Proposing a 1-year slight increase there for our engineering tech. We need just some like a cubicle wall, a workstation in Building 7. We have a few desks here and there, but it's a permanent office space that we need. So it's, if anyone remembers where Rory's office is, it's sort of a built-in cubicle walls that we are looking to install for our engineering tech.
Director, I flagged a couple things. Vehicle maintenance and repair and gasoline. Your actuals are up considerably from your budget of 2019, and your 2020 budgets are pretty much mirrored in the 2019 budget. Any reason why we should anticipate huge increases again this year in those two line items?
I wouldn't expect so, and if I could just clarify with Joanne whether in the vehicle maintenance and repair, if there was a journal entry for the Vector and the camera truck yet? Was that taken out yet? Okay. Okay, so that explains a few things. So our Vector truck and our camera truck are mainly sanitary vehicles, and they've always been budgeted for under Public Works. And at the end of the year, any of the costs associated with those trucks are transferred into sanitary.
Okay.
So this year we're actually creating their own accounts in sanitary, so we don't have to do this transfer. So that's why there was quite a bit of expensive repairs needed for that Vector. In fact, we had to replace it. It had been budgeted for last year to do a big maintenance program on that truck, and that was about $25,000. It might even be $30,000 for the Vector, and the camera truck so that will come out.
Okay.
But yes, every year it does change. Vehicle maintenance, we never really know what to expect. But we have taken on a couple of newer big vehicles that have been big tickets for maintenance in the last few years. So, and then when you see the Vector and the CCTV truck in the sanitary sewer, they actually have a budgeted amount this year, so it should make a little bit more sense.
Any questions for the Director? No?
So I will draw your attention to page 115. This is where it shows that city work student shared with parks, the $4,200. That's half of that student salary. Okay, so page 118, oh, sorry. Bridges and culverts is 116. I don't have anything to note on this page. It's a pretty small budget that is really mostly labor. Nothing to add. Is there any questions?
Mayor Henderson?
Through you, Madam Chair, I apologize. This might be slightly off topic. I just saw roadside grass and weeds. Just an off comment. I'm making a strong assumption we don't use any Roundup in our weeding.
No, there is a product. It's called Finelsin. It's a herbicide, and it's not a Roundup product, but I would have to have Jason Johns from Parks explain more of what that product's about. But I believe that there was an email sent out about it recently this year about what we use for the spraying of weeds.
Okay, and the reason, if you could send that to me, I just want to make council quickly aware. We had a recorded vote at county the other day. I was on the losing end of that vote. That's fine, but the whole issue was that the county will continue to use Roundup. So that's why any information would help me. So just to be aware, thank you.
I was disappointed when I read that, because the one time I represented you at County's Council was when that Roundup vote came. We won. I was on the winning side that day. I voted against it. So I was glad to see you also voted against it, but didn't have the same outcome, unfortunately.
So
Sorry, Councillor Darling?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, Lori, just to back up, when you said earlier on page 115, there's a casual labor budget requirement of almost 17,000, 16,910. Is that the amount that will come out if we get a full-time?
No, that is our students. That's
Pardon me?
about 4 students for the roads and sewers.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So roadside grass and weeds on page 118, similar to the bridges and culverts. Nothing special to add here. This is, this is mostly just labor for cutting grass, mostly at sight lines, intersections for sight lines. Our storm drain system, page 120. Also, a little hard to predict sometimes with the materials and contracts. It's really sort of as, you know, you'll see a sinkhole beside a catch basin, or the frame has shifted off, or there's just damage around a catch basin or manhole. That's sort of the type of repairs we're talking about here. It wasn't too bad of a year. You can see in 2018 it was. We spent 50 in contracts, and this year we're only at 17, so we'll keep our budget down at 20 for contracts and hope that that's enough for this year. Again, these are not scheduled maintenance. This is just sort of reactionary. As there's an issue, we have to repair them. Roadside debris, litter pickup and sweeping on page 122. Just note that we've reduced the contracts down to 35 from 45. This is for we do have to contract this work out when the sweeper empties all of its, whatever it picks up, it dumps it in our yard, and then we have a contractor come and screen it for us and take the debris to the dump. Sometimes if we don't have very much to process, then we don't have to spend as much on contracts, and in the last few years we haven't had to spend an awful lot, so we're able to reduce that. Questions? Pavement repairs, page 124. So, not going to see an awful lot charged to this year. Typically, it's for crack sealing. In September, we usually have about 8 people for 4 to 6 weeks doing crack sealing. We didn't have time to do that this year due to we had a lack of staff, and as I mentioned, we have several people off in the summer. And the LAV 3 project took up quite a bit of our time this year, which is a really special project for us, but it did take away from some of our maintenance activities. And also Lakefront Utilities, we did some water main restoration work for them, which we don't normally do. They were finding it very challenging to find a contractor at all to come and do the restoration of the works once they've had a water main break. And when they were able to find them, they were being charged exorbitant amount of money, so they asked us for help, and we fixed up a couple of their water main repairs for them, which not something we typically do, so that took up a little bit more of our time, so we scratched our crack filling program for the year. So you will see that under other operating materials, where we only spent $7,500 when it was budgeted as $37,000. Winter maintenance, page 126. I'll just note the de-icing materials, that's our salt. We've increased it a little bit by 10,000, but you'll see that we have a lot spent, 186 or more thousand on the year to date. So last year there was a salt shortage, and we have a very big salt shed, so we're essentially stockpiling to make sure that we don't run out of salt. And also, on top of it, there was quite a big increase in cost for salt this year. We get our salt from 2 different suppliers, just in case one runs out or goes away. We always have a backup supplier. This year we had one of our suppliers went up by $10 a ton, and the other supplier went up by $2 a ton. So there's quite a significant expenditure this year. But at the end of the year, we do an inventory to see what we actually used per year and then how much salt we have stockpiled moving into 2020. So it's not all spent and used up this year. We were just buying it and stockpiling it to prepare for the winter.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Director Wills, I know we're always addressing ongoing issues of winter maintenance. And I know, thank you for sharing your justification report for a general utility worker. But I guess my question is, as we head into this year, have we yet developed a plan or costing how we're going to tackle what I call the unique areas, like roads that have no boulevard, or what I call hot areas over bridges and sidewalks? Because I can tell you, in my first year, that for me was the number one criticism of focus. So I guess my question I'm asking ahead of time, do we have enough resources and money going forward to address that?
Through the chair to Mayor Anderson. So we don't have any changes happening to our the actual sidewalks that are plowed this year. What we are anticipating changing with this additional winter or seasonal winter that we had last year. So this is the first time we've had that additional person. Normally sidewalks don't start to get plowed until after the storm has ended, after all the roads have been plowed. And then we have somebody who's back in the office during regular hours, so not on overtime hours, to start doing the sidewalks. So that's why there's a long delay before sidewalks even start. So this year, we're proposing to just move the timeline up so that, again, we still have to wait for the storm to end because there's no sense of doing sidewalks until the plow trucks have gone through on the main arterials and collector roads. And then first thing at 7 in the morning, when our regular shift starts, the sidewalks will start right away. Instead of waiting until all of the residential streets are done, we'll start the sidewalks right away with at least one person. So it doesn't seem like a big deal, but with the whole hours of service and our driving, it'll be interesting to see how it works out, because we often have to save a lot of our regular hours of driving time in case there's more storms coming. So they'll still have to plan if there's a storm coming day after day. They have to reserve those driving hours. So having someone driving a sidewalk plow machine counts as driving hours. So it would take away from plowing the roads hours. So it's a fine, sorry, I'm not explaining this well, I don't think. It's a fine balance of maintaining enough drive time for the big winter storms, but also getting on the sidewalks faster than we have in the past.
If I can ask a subsequent question, Madam Chair. When you're saying that, just my understanding, you say general utility worker, and I apologize, I'm still learning. Would a general utility worker qualify for operating a sidewalk kind of vehicle, or does that require another type of job description?
No, you're correct. That our general utility workers are trained to do everything, so they can all plow the sidewalks and the roads. So, but as a follow-up as well, is I am working on a further plan about cost per kilometer of how much for sidewalks, how much they cost, and that will flow into how much the roads cost per kilometer if I'm able to, and that incorporates all the costs of our equipment and our people and materials, salt. I'm working on that program so that I can give you some advice if you want to increase the sidewalk plowing, how much it would cost and how many more resources and equipment you would need to do that. So I'm getting there, but I wasn't ready to bring it to this meeting yet.
And I appreciate your future endeavor in all of this. When I was referring to hot items, I'll give one example. I'm not referring to every street in Cobourg. I'm just referring to ones that are unique. And I'll give you a quick example. Margaret, on the west side, there's no sidewalk, no boulevard, lots of room to put snow. Sorry, west side. But if you go to the east side, they have all of 6.5 inches between the road and the sidewalk. So I have to tell you that street gets, when it does get done, it gets clobbered 24/7. There's no hope. So that's what I mean by hot area, because there's nowhere to put the snow. There really isn't, unless you can throw it the other side of the road. So again, I'm not speaking of every road in Cobourg, but just ones that for us are unique, or unfortunately were built at a time when they no longer would be built to today's standards. So thank you for that.
I have a question, Director Wills. With our aging population and our bylaw that basically states that homeowners have to clear their own sidewalks, you had just mentioned the possibility of adding more people to do these sidewalks, and I understand the timelines between plowing the streets, arterial, and then going forward from there. Is there anything, have you ever done any research for other communities our size as to what they do with that situation? Are there fines for homeowners that don't plow their sidewalks, or is that a standard thing? Because, well, of course, I came from a small community where there was no such thing, and we still had to plow the roads, we still had to plow the sidewalks, but we didn't get charged if we didn't do our own sidewalks because they got done. So I'm just, as we age, that may become more and more of a problem. Some people can afford to have people clean their driveways and their sidewalks, but some people can't. So I'm just checking to see if you've done any research on that. I certainly don't want to add anything to this budget, but I'm just saying we may, we do get those kinds of calls in the wintertime.
Fair enough. I haven't looked at too many other municipalities of what their bylaws are. I think it's pretty common that for any sidewalk that isn't plowed, then it's the property owner's responsibility. The only other example that I know a little bit of is Peterborough. They do plow all of their sidewalks, but they also have enough staff to run shifts. So their hours of driving is not a concern because they're only ever working an 8-hour shift. So 24 hours a day, they can continually be driving. They have enough staff to do that. So that's much, much different. We would not have the capability to do that at all. And once I get to the cost of how much it is per kilometer of sidewalk, it's not a small number at all. No, so far, that's what I'm finding.
Second question, have you ever looked at any alternates for salt on the roads? Is that, I know that's the standard, but over the years, does it erode the roads as much as we hear? Is there any options for that? You mentioned the price is going up substantially, and I'm just wondering if you've looked into that.
My understanding is salt doesn't have as bad an impact as we expect on the trees and the grass around it. That's even coming true through the low impact development research that's been going on with conservation authorities, because we're worried about trees getting damaged if we're starting to infiltrate salted water in the urban environment, and the trees are pretty resilient in that way. And being in an urban environment, we have storm sewers, so putting anything other than salt goes down the storm sewer and goes into the creeks. So the sand, the siltation that we'd be putting in our creeks would be far worse. Just because once salt is in there, it does get diluted with the snow melt, it does get diluted with the rainwater, and by the time it gets to the creeks, or if it's running through the ditches, that helps to filter it out a little bit. It's actually better than sand, sadly.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor, to the Director. Have we reduced our salt use by reducing an application rate? I say that in that, like, the major arteries get salted and whatnot, but years ago we used to just salt every street the second it snowed, but I noticed a lot of the secondary streets do not seem to get salted. It's just they're plowed off, and then you drive on the condition the road is at that time versus taking it right back to bare pavement. Have we reduced that at all in residential subdivisions where the traffic speed is a lot less, that we're using less salt because you can drive on a bit of a snow base on the road?
I would have to, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but my understanding is the salt needs to go down on the bare pavement, so that's why the arterials will get it ahead of a storm if we're lucky. So they wouldn't be going around on the rural streets and salting them because they're generally not bare pavement in the middle of winter. So putting it down on the salt pack or on the winter snow pack doesn't help it as much as it being on the bare pavement. So yeah, I would anticipate that there's very little salt on the residential streets.
Okay, are we ready to move on, Director?
So safety devices on page 128. There's a special project here that is new, the signal warrant study at King and College. So this is an uncontrolled mid-block crossing that I get requests for these frequently around town, where there's typically people like to cross. There's, you know, down at Albert here where there's the colored concrete. Those are uncontrolled mid-block crossings that I will never support, and I'm okay saying that out loud. They're not ideal, and they're not in accordance with best practices, with Highway Traffic Act, with any kind of engineering best practices. So I understand that this is a really busy crossing, but the signage is confusing, even though it's correct. It can't be enforced by the police because, again, there's no lights. There's no way for them to understand if the pedestrian's doing the wrong thing or if the car's doing the wrong thing. So the police are also not in support of this crossing. So we would like to have it assessed to determine if it does warrant a traffic light or not, and then decide what happens after that. So it's only $2,600, and this type of study would also, it would be the same cost for anywhere else we need to do this type of warrant, even at crossing guard locations. If there's any other residents that come forward that they want to do this type of study, just so you're aware, it's about $2,600, which is a nominal fee, but maybe not always warranted at every request, but I think this is a pretty good spot to do it.
I tend to agree. I get a lot of people taking pictures of that crosswalk and that sign on that pole.
Yep.
And they're telling me it's confusing and you know, it's not the car's fault, it's not the pedestrian, you know. So I think that's a really good, so will you time the number of cars that go back and forth, or how will the study evolve?
Both. It'll be cars and pedestrians. They'll have somebody probably there for at least a day, like 8 hours at least, and they'll video it so that they can go back and check the numbers and report on whether it warrants a light or not. That's good. And then the other special project is the same as last year, the flashing light and sign at King and Abbott. So last year I had this in for $5,000 as well, and I was mistaken, and I understood it was for 2 lights. It's only for 1. So we have 1 light, and it is actually being installed right now. There was a delay in having it supplied. It is a flashing yellow light similar to the one on Elgin Street for the school by Darcy there. But this one will have a speed readout as well, which is great, and it's solar powered, so it doesn't require power. And it's going to be installed in the westbound zone, westbound lane, because that seems to be the one that has the most speeding and traffic issues. And so I'm proposing we get the second one, and we'll put it closer to Darcy before the high school on the eastbound lane.
Good.
That's it for that sheet. Sidewalks on page 130. There's a special project noted here for downtown paver stone repairs that I had last year.
Any idea why that didn't get done last year?
Yes.
Obvious question.
So we were ready to go, and we had to wait for the hanging baskets to come off the poles. That's why it was a little late. But by the time we actually got to that time in the fall, our contract bill a little bit further down, it's not showing up there, but in the year to date, we're probably closer to 50,000 plus. So our contractor for sidewalks is for pumping. So there's a product that can go underneath a sidewalk and it pumps it up. It's like a grout, and it's pretty cheap now, and it's fast, and it can fix a lot of our issues rather than us pulling out the whole sidewalk and fixing the base and putting in a new one. It saves us a lot of time, but we spent a lot of money on it this year. I think we kind of let the contractor go a little more than he should have, and even though we got a lot of these deficiencies completed, it sort of ate up our budget. So we cut out the special project for this year. It was also pretty late in the year anyway. It just helped us to stay within budget, and we do plan to do it next year, but before the baskets go up. So it's in the budget again, same as last year.
Did you look at any options for those paver stones? Because they do tend to buckle, almost every one of them that is surrounding a tree.
Yes.
Will that not be repeated if you put more paving stones in there?
For this one, we're taking them all out and putting in concrete pads. And last year you had mentioned why didn't we consider doing grates or something under the baskets? And I should have known this at the time, but if we're allowing water to drain under the sidewalk, it has to go someplace. So it would be attached to a drain, which would be attached to the road. There's drains under the road. It would be a much bigger project, but allowing the water to get in there and not have it way out, then that causes everything to heave anyway. So unfortunately, in this case, unless we were rebuilding all of King Street and we could provide those drains for the grates underneath the baskets or around the trees, a lot of trees have grates and drainage systems in the big cities. But for retrofitting, the concrete pad is the best option to keep all those bricks from shifting.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, Director, for the sidewalk pumping, I would take that's a bit of an anomaly that won't happen every year, that they've fixed them up, and it might be multiple years before we have to do that amount again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we will keep them down to a upset limit this time. Crossing guards on 132, pretty much the same. I just wanted to note that year-to-date for 2019, there was a big expenditure that was budgeted for last year, and that was the flashing stop signs. But again, that was a one-year purchase, and we'll go back to our regular safety gear as a clothing under materials.
How many crossing guards do we have, Director?
8 and 1 spare. So street lighting on page 135 is the same as last year. You'll see the other maintenance account has been zeroed out. This has been was capitalized last year, so we're doing a multi-year capital program to replace our induction lights with the LED, and we hired a new contractor to do that. They started on July 1st, and so far they've replaced 160 lights. And that's based on residents complaining through our app, and also they are required to do an annual inspection every year, something we've never done and we should be doing. And they did that this year, and I think there was upwards of over 100 lights that they found. So they're still working on fixing all of those.
Sorry, Councillor Bureau?
Right, through you, Chair. Have you, replacing the downtown streetlights, I know, is that coming up sometime soon, or are we just staying the way it is for now?
Through the chair, the lights are only being replaced as they burn out. So it's we're keeping them until they die.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to the CAO. The budget line debenture payment, when is that debenture paid off? Do we know? Off the top of it.
2029. So it's 10 years. We're halfway there.
So you'll still be here, Councillor Darling, in 2029? Ask that question again.
I don't know in this seat, but I hope to be around.
Okay. So page 137, transit. So our payroll, first section, salaries, we're currently recovering 50% of one employee for transit, but we may have to consider a full-time for transit management in consideration of the more and more demand of staff time, as this person is also supposed to be supporting parking and engineering, which seems to be less and less time. They have less and less time to put towards. We may also have to start showing some of my time recovered here based on the time that I'm spending on transit. We do have a little bit of time recovered for a general utility worker under this cost as well, for general shelter maintenance and relocation, transit sign installation, and so on. So if you can look down at shelter maintenance, last year we had 15,000. This is just a a reorganization again. Typically, most of our shelter maintenance is done by contract, and that's the cleaning and shoveling. So since it's a contract, I've just moved it down into its own contracted services. You'll see it under contract shelter maintenance as a new item for 13.5. So between the two of those, it's still the same 15,000. I've just allotted what the actual contract time is, separate from what our public works staff might need for shelter maintenance for small little items.
How many transit shelters do we have, and do they get assessed every year for any damage? Do you usually repair one a year, or as needed, I'm guessing, but how many do we have?
I believe there's 26. I might be wrong, but somewhere around there. And last year we did 10 we had funding for an additional, the year before that was 10 new ones, and last year we didn't do any. We took a break one year. This year we did 2, which was replacing 2 damaged ones. So yes, as they're needed to either be replaced, we'll do that, or we'll add 2 new shelters a year, and you'll see a capital item for that later on.
That's why I asked the question.
So the contract section is where we'll see some increases because of our new contract coming up in January. We've broken it out into the extended accessible transit contract, and then 2 lines down is contracts in total, and that's conventional service. So the conventional has gone up to 811 from about 800, and that's literally just a rate increase. It's the same provider for the conventional service. And the same provider this time will be doing our wheels service as well. This contract includes wheels as well. The only thing that's separate as a contract is the extended accessible transit, and that's from the 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. We just wanted to break it out. So the extended accessible transit, just to make sure this is clear.
Excuse me, Director, the Mayor has a question.
Madam Chair, thank you. Could I just ask later when you come back, could you just give details in your statement of purpose for 751 extended, so we have that information as well for future? Thank you.
It's actually on the second page, 140. There's 2 pages. No problem. Okay, so the accessible transit extended service in 2019, there was the 72,000 that was approved to extend the wheel service to 11 p.m. every day for 8 months. The actual cost to do this was actually only 26,000. The rate that was used for that budget item was the other operators' rate. So the people that are doing it right now is BTS, and they had a much cheaper rate. So we'll be far under budget this year. For the 8 months, it's going to be about the $26,000, and for the year it would have been 40, but that service provider is not going to be providing the accessible transit service next year. So next year, 2020, the budgeted number required to maintain this extended service is 76,000, closer to what was budgeted last year, because of the operator's rate is similar to what you were using last year. So without the extended service, if we were to not use the gas tax, we used gas tax to offset this cost last year, but if we didn't use it this year, the transit increase is up 23% this year. If you offset it with the gas tax, that brings it down to an 11% increase. And then if we do use the gas tax towards this service, we'll have to take gas tax away from some of my other capital projects. So we have the gas tax to distribute amongst whatever works we need, and transit is one of them you're able to put it towards. But if we do put the 76 to the gas tax, then it comes out of other capital works. So in this budget, we don't have it shown as recovered yet. So a little bit further down the line, you'll see transfer federal gas tax. It's at 0. If you would like to pay for the extended accessible transit again this year, there'll have to be a minus 76,378 there.
Director, this 76,000, you've given hours of the, during the week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday to Friday. Is that for the full year? Those estimates?
Yep.
So it's a 12-month?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the 76 is on the second, on page 140. You'll see the breakdown of all the hours associated. I'll also,
Councillor Darling?
oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can I get the numbers again for the extended service that we just put in for the past 8 months? So that was the 26,000, that's what it worked out to?
26,340, I believe.
26,343. So you're saying that last night when you commented at council, you said there was 94 times it was used in those in the last 6 months, or that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
So on the left corner or left side of page 139, you'll see the ridership for this year. The Wheels extended service ridership after 7 p.m. had 94 users, 94 rides in 6 months. So based on the 2019 rates, it's $207 a ride. And based on the 2020 rates, it'll be close to $400 a ride.
okay, that's what I wanted to figure out. Thank you.
Councillor Beatty?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Director Wills. And if this isn't the right forum to ask this question, I'm happy to discuss it possibly offline with yourself and Councillor Darling. I'm just thinking, and this is no criticism of your department at all, I think we can all agree how essential this service is for our community. I don't know what the right solution or the cost for that solution is. At what point do we or your team explore comparable alternatives, whether that is, and I'm probably not using the right language, but on-demand service, subsidized taxis? Are we providing the right format of the service? And again, this is not a, I don't expect the answer, this is not a critical statement, it's just more of an exploratory question.
Through the chair. So I have a line item, not for this year, under special project transit studies for next year, 2021. And the reason for that is mostly resources. I have my transit administrator, who is really only 50% of a transit administrator, who's off this year. And although I have a replacement who's very good, they don't have the background of what the transit users are in need of or requiring, or they don't know the dynamics of the town. So I'm very wary to do a transit study right away without that full-time person being back, and that's why I've requested it for 2021. And it would be a transit study about a lot of things. My number one on my list of at least 6 things to study would be a 24-hour accessible taxi. 100% seems to be the highest priority, in my opinion, before any kind of expansion thoughts or any changes. That's where I really think the highest priority is. And if we have $76,000 to spend, it would be nice to be able to put it towards that kind of solving that problem. It's nice to have the buses extended to 11, but it doesn't go 24 hours, so it doesn't solve that. And it may, I don't know if 75,000 is the dollar amount we would need to solve the 24 hours, but it might, we don't know at that point. So I would like to study it. We did have a study in 2014. It's not that long ago. We haven't implemented all the recommendations of that report even, and those were big recommendations of expansions that I don't think we're ready for. There's a lot of questions about shared services and electric buses and on-demand transit. Again, I don't think we're ready for any of this stuff, but we definitely need to study it before we do any of it to find out how much it will cost and create that business plan. We need to, as a town, myself, my department, I need a staff to be able to drive that study, and I need the study to be done by a transit professional who can give us some really good recommendations, because we don't have that here. So I have talked to Port Hope, their transit department and their director of public works and engineering again, about making sure we're on the same page as far as going ahead with any transit studies. They're on the same boat. They're not ready to do any studies yet. They've just changed their transit system as well. They have their own bus drivers and smaller buses, much different system than ours. But we both agreed that if there's more of the transit stream funding coming, which we are being told there is going to be, that we will come together and do a transit study together. Apply for that so that we can talk about our shared services and rural expansion if necessary. And also, the county is doing a Go Transit expansion study right now, surprisingly. So once we get the outcome of that, there might be something that impacts Cobourg as well. So waiting for the results of that would be helpful for us to know where that might be going, if anywhere. And they'll be looking at microtransit and on-demand transit, but related to servicing outside of Cobourg. So that could be an interesting one to come back to as well. But again, I don't want to jump the gun and start studying things without the right resources in place and without that county report and without Port Hope quite yet. So it's a really, we're in a tough spot. Transit's really a challenge for a small town. It's very, very expensive, and we have a lot of users that Wheels is very popular. It's almost over capacity. People have a hard time booking appointments, and then of course after hours, if there's any emergencies, we're in a real tough spot, I think.
Mayor Henderson, followed by Councillor Burkett.
Madam Chair, and to Director, with all due respect, I know we believe in studies. The studies have to be done appropriately, but we're of the thinking between Port Hope, myself, and others, we can't wait always long-term for every resolution. So I expect in our meetings that are forthcoming, we'll have some short-term, quick recommendations coming forward, eventually back to both councils. We'll have some middle road recommendations coming back, because our need is high now. Most studies take close to a year. We can't wait a year. And then we can still agree what we're going to do in a unified approach, because you're right, the county's working on transit overview towards Clarington, same conversations in Port Hope, same conversations in Cobourg, and yet we have a transit study upcoming for a thorough review. So I'm not negating a transit study long-term with proper planning, detailed to the future. That's required. But I can tell you, when we start to meet moving ahead, we are looking to Councillor Beatty's comment, short, quick turnaround options that are available to our public. So my answer is we're looking, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, at all three: short turnaround, midterm, long term.
Councillor Burkett first, and then Councillor Bureau.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. To the Director, through you to the Director, if we had conversations with community care with the service that they offer, and what are what are their hours of operation? Do we know that? Like, are they outside of business hours, or?
Through the chair, I don't believe so, but they may be able to, more so than us. Yes, they don't have the agreements and contracts that we do. But we have been talking with them to see if there's anything else we can do to help improve our system by utilizing theirs as well. Right now, they generally don't supply transit within Cobourg, so they bring people from outside to Cobourg, but people within Cobourg use Wheels instead. So.
Follow up, Councillor Burkett, then Councillor Bureau, and then the Mayor.
So in regards, regards to that 70,000 there, is there an opportunity to potentially use that to utilize their service and instead of the extended from the other company?
Through the chair, there is potential. Again, I don't know the cost associated with that, but we've had very good talks with community care. They're so willing to help, so we'll continue to talk with them about those types of opportunities, especially to do with the after hours.
Councillor Bureau?
Actually, my question is for our worship. Is your talks with Port Hope and over the transit, is that going to be coming anytime soon to this council or this budget deliberations, or is this a next year thing for 2021?
Mayor Henderson?
Our hope, we don't know if it will play out based on discussion. We have common consensus to bring something perhaps in this budget discussion, certainly on a short-term reflection. And the reason I say that, because the dynamics we used to measure transit before I arrived, I don't believe are the same measures we use for transit today and the demographics we have. So it's much to say that to Councillor Burkett that committee is not part of, well, they were never really included. The only exception was Coburg. So my answer is we really got to learn to play in the sandbox a little bit together and better and combine our resources, which we've not done in past. So we're going to have a conversation on getting in the sandbox. We all play together. We all share our resources. And where does that take us? And I'd like to believe if we do that, we can have short-term outcomes for not only our public, but for Port Hope and those living in rural areas. So I'm hoping, with the help of CAO and Councillor Darling, that we'll make great gains. If we don't, I'll certainly bring that back.
Just one. Mayor Henderson, will community care be at that table?
No, they would be another layer, but they have come into the office asking how they could be a player to enhance their services because they have clienteles, they know what they're doing, they have staff. The only thing they appear to be missing is the actual vehicle and cost because they normally can't afford that. So there's a lot of tiering going on, a lot of conversations to be had between all the different parties. But I'm convinced we have to do something in the short term. I'm not against midterm planning and long-term plans and transit planning, but if we do that, we only stick to that one route, we'll be 2 years out. We can't wait 2 years.
Councillor Chorley?
My question is regarding the special project, the transit study that you've mentioned, because obviously it sounds as if more study, more conversations, more partnerships need to be developed for transit in general, but for accessible transit in particular. At the moment, you've got that budgeted for 2021, $60,000. I'm just wondering if it's possible, if it's feasible, whether it would work with the timelines in terms of the conversations that our mayor is having with Port Hope to bring that forward into 2020.
Through the chair, I obviously knew this was going to be an issue, that transit is, everyone wants to fix it right away. I can move it ahead. Again, all I have to say is I got to cut something else, and I guess it's going to be me doing it. I do have a full-time person replacing our full-time transit person right now, but just not having that full-time person here, I just didn't think was a great timing for us to proceed with a big change in transit without that staff member. But understanding that it is a priority.
Just a quick comment. A lot of our, I guess, budgets incorporate a fee for service, and I believe community care does as well. I know in Brockville, for example, a community of 23,000, when you need to order a special vehicle, the individual pays for that vehicle. So I'm just wondering, the Wheels Transit, is that a free service or is that a pay-for-service?
It's paid the same as conventional. They pay
Okay,
the
so
same
people use that, they pay a small fee. Some communities are going to free transit, and that seems to be a trend that I'm reading about as well. But again, that has to be offset. To your point about your $60,000 transit study, if we make it free, if we make parking free, whatever we make free, we have to offset that somewhere else. Because otherwise we just go crazy. So.
To follow up on your comment there is about the free transit, for your information, if that was something you were interested in, that you'll see in our revenue section, on page 138. So the difference between the 328 and 205. We're typically bringing in about 120 or 140 for revenue, so that would be the amount that you would have to cut, essentially, to provide the free transit. One final comment about the accessible extended service is, because our contract is starting in January 2020, we do need to provide the contractor with some direction whether that extended service is happening or not. So as part of the contract, it was typical hours, plus we reserve the right to extend it to 11. So they're aware that they may have to run to 11, but if it's not budget approved, then they don't. They'll need to hire people to do the 11 o'clock service. So we will need to give them a yes or no fairly soon so that they can make sure that they have the staffing available to start January 1st with the 11 o'clock service. I think it would only be fair to commit to it if we're going to do it for their sake, because they will be hiring employees.
Mayor Henderson?
Madam Chair, my only comment can be, under AOLA standards and equity policies for all, I don't know how we can't in today's world. I mean, we're to treat anybody who can get out or can't get out across the board like any the rest of us who have independent access, and so we do have to work towards a universal right policy on this. So I don't know how we couldn't do this. So I'll leave that open to your comment.
Councillor Bureau?
From our former CAO, Stephen Peacock, explained the rules on accessible transit, and you're right, we do have to do, we have to provide the same amount of service of accessible transit as regular transit. But this is the accessible transit going till 11 far surpasses the regular transit. So that's why it was, we voted last year on that. What I'm really curious is I know last year you did talk about the transit coming from forming partnerships in Port Hope at the last budget, and was hoping that it would be in this budget. Is that going to be close to this one? Because if not, that's going to affect my decision making on how to move forward with this. So if it's not going to be coming back by the time we do our budget deliberations, then I don't know if we can share that or how we're going to move forward on that.
Mayor Henderson?
Madam Chair, I can't, Councilor Burrow, tell how fast we're going to move. We're going to do our best. We're having those meetings early December, like first week in December. I know we have to make a decision for our director certainly before the end of December. We'll certainly do our best, but I know Port Hope is having the identical same conversations with Mayor Sanderson that we're having today. So I'm hoping for something positive, and then I can give you good news, this council and our director.
Just as Councillor Chorley?
Just a comment through to Director Wills. Again, I would echo the mayor that I do fully support the extended accessible transit, but I think it would be helpful for council. I don't know if it's possible to get a breakdown of those, I think it was 96 users, exactly what time they were using the service, maybe per hour, just so we can see if there's any usage in the really, really late hours.
That's a great suggestion. Councillor Darling?
Just a point of order, can I ask for a 5-minute break? Yesterday we sat for 3 hours without a break.
I was going to bring us up to 5. Can you hang on till then, or do you have to go right now?
Well, I don't know whether, how long we're going to be going here, so I don't want to wait till 5 and find out we're breaking at quarter after.
No, we won't be breaking at quarter after, but can you wait till 5?
Yeah, okay, just as long as it's on somebody's mind besides me.
It is on my mind. I'm thinking about you because I heard your comment last night. I will not let you sit here for 3 hours. Just one final question to Councillor or to Director Wills before we leave this conversation. Again, with the accessibility, it's a very hot topic and a very needed topic right now. And again, I go back to user pay. I know that with handicapped spaces, people still have to put money in the meter for those spaces, regardless of the fact that they're in a wheelchair. And it's unfortunate, but that is, a fact of life. So do we charge anything for the 8 months of extended accessibility transit?
And it's the same fee as your conventional and wheel service. It's $2 a ride, or they can buy a pass for the month, or same fees. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well.
Yes, and just to reaffirm Councillor Bureau's point, is this is an extended service. It's a great accessible service, but it is beyond the conventional, and we're not required because they have to match. So whatever we provide for conventional, you have to provide an accessible, and because this is just an accessible extension, it isn't a requirement, but it's something that people are getting used to. As far as the ridership times, I don't have the exact times, but I did inquire about typical usages, and it seems that there's about 6 people that have used it. 2 seem to be using it for a sort of work-related regular schedule every day, and the rest are sort of randomly in the evening, not in a particular pattern.
Councillor Jordan?
Just a comment, but I think my concern is hearing that that one company was able to provide, we were able to contract the service to them for approximately $200 a ride, but to hear that another company now would cost twice as much makes me wonder, are we really finding the best efficiencies here? If one company can do it for less, are there other options out there? Is contracting this out the right thing to do, or is this something that we should bring in-house? So those are just considerations, I think, for a transit study going forward.
Councillor Bureau, can you shut off your mic, please?
My apology.
May I follow? So the cheaper rate that we have with the other operator right now is they use their own vehicles. So it's a different vehicle that has a lift, and our wheels bus is used by Century Transportation that provides the conventional. And the reason why we ended up going with 2 different operators is because at the time when we needed Century to extend their service to match hours, or whenever the conventional were happening, the wheels had to happen, they weren't able to provide the wheel service in the morning hours and in the evening hours. So it's very confusing for people to call. They have to call 2 different numbers during the day, whether they want their appointment during those 2 hours in the morning or their 3 hours at night. So we wanted that when we tendered the contract again, we wanted one contractor. If you have to hire somebody, some new people to cover all of the hours, then that's what we required in the contract, so that there's one number, there's one supplier. And unfortunately, the other company that's cheaper because they have smaller vehicles, they aren't capable of providing the same service that the other one was. So they don't have backup conventional buses. We require the contractor to have a backup big bus for when ours are broken down. So they weren't able to bid on the contract.
Before we leave transit, we had an announcement from MPP David Piccini earlier this year on funding for, I believe, 2 new transit buses, 3. Are they smaller, more efficient? And secondary question, when are they going to be in service?
You will see it in capital, and I did just actually get an email about that funding and I was asking if they knew when, and they were hoping within the next few weeks that they would have an answer on whether the federal component will match what the province has put forth. And yes, you'll see the new buses that we're proposing are the same as what we have now. We are looking at, we have a passenger counter now on these buses, so they tell us, we're waiting for a report from Transit Fair to tell us when are our peak times and how many people are on those buses per hour to see if we can reduce the size. But I'm learning that the rule of thumb for transit is never to reduce the size, because then there doesn't allow any opportunity for growth, and we're trying to grow ridership to get people to use transit more often. Unfortunately for us, with only 2 routes, one route is much less used than the one route. But with our small service, we have 3 buses. They all interchange, so we can't have different sized buses because we use them each for backing each other up. There are larger buses and there are smaller buses. Ours is sort of like a mid-size bus. And also when somebody is using it with a mobility device, it uses up 2 or 3 spots sometimes, so it reduces the capacity on the bus. So not so simple to reduce the size, but we will keep looking at it to see if that is feasible.
Do you have a question, Councillor Darling? Had you looked into the on-call service that I believe Belleville does? I believe it's probably in the extended hours as opposed to business hours. Have you looked into that at all? I'm not even sure if that was successful. That just launched maybe 3 or 4 months ago. No, it was longer than that, probably 6 months ago. Do you have an answer, Mayor Henderson?
I can, but I'd rather reserve my answer to the meeting to share with players at table that and other municipalities have been studied. We have all that information, will be forthcoming.
So can we move on from transit, everyone? Councillor Darling's bio break is 10 minutes away, so we've got time for one more page. Okay.
Sorry, one more comment on transit. On page 138, there is a fare increase proposal in your package. That's handout number 3.
What is the fare increase?
It's spread out over, I think, 3 or 5 years.
We're still seeing 72. You're on page 138?
Mm-hmm.
72, the budget from 2019 to 2020 looks identical to me.
Last year we had budgeted to do a fare increase.
Okay.
And we didn't. So that's why they're the same. So that proposal is there in draft for your review. It's a small increase, and it doesn't increase revenues too much, but we have not done any increases in several years, so it's worth looking at. Okay. So parking on lots, page 142. I don't have any extra notes for this page. It's pretty much standard, same as last year. Any questions?
Those parking lot contracts, I'm seeing they're staying the same under rents for this next year and the next 2 years after that. Do they ever fluctuate? Are they a 5-year contract, or maybe Mr. Davey can explain that?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I believe they were a 5-year fixed rate contract. The lease on the lot on the south side of Albert would be like that. The lease, what we call the 2nd Street lot, or the former Quigley Hardware store lot, is month to month right now. There is no long-term lease on that property.
Parking, admin, and enforcement, page 144. The only note I have is the very bottom line under total revenue. That's same as the transit fare increase. I also have a parking fare increase, so that's handout number 4. And you'll see again, we had proposed to do that last year, and that's why the revenues are showing the same. We would have tried to increase the fares last year, but it did not happen, so we're proposing the same increase this year.
I did a quick some math on your revenue subtracting materials cost for 2018, 2019, and 2020, and it ranged. The difference in 2018 was 306,000, 2019 351, 2020 proposed 413,950 between what your proposed revenue and what your material costs are going to be. Can you explain that huge difference?
Sorry, I lost you part way through.
I just basically looked at what this budget sheet says for revenue for the parking admin. Each of the 3 years, 2018, budget 2019, I didn't do year-to-date 19, and 2020 department request. And the 2020 department request, the difference between the revenue and the materials is 413,950, which is up from 306 difference in 2018. So $100,000 difference from 2018 to and about in what you're proposing. In other words, you're bringing in a bit more money, and it's obviously the costing isn't that different. So I'm just saying that's revenue, obviously.
Right. So I think the difference there is the revenue for Victoria Park is expected to be 330 from 260. If I can just flip to the.
And how do you analyze that big increase? I mean, because it does affect the budget obviously overall, because it offsets your material cost in a positive way by increasing your budgets. And I'm just wondering the rationale for those increases.
So in that parking handout, we would have taken what was received from coin revenue in Victoria Park. It's $2 an hour right now, and we are proposing an increase to $3. So that's how that would have been projected, that big increase. That's where it's the most significant. I think that explains almost the 100,000 right there. 70.
Mayor Henderson?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Just question, Director Wills. I know we went into honk this past while. Is there any kind of reportable, I'm just curious, revenue, or is it kind of just level out? Is there any kind of revenue to be noted from our contribution as part of being part of that honk? And if so, where would that be noted?
Through the chair, I don't have a report, but I can show the difference of the. There has been a considerable increase in revenue because of honk. It's much easier for people to top up their meters or to buy passes online now. So the number of transactions through honk would sort of indicate how many more people are actually paying for parking. But we'll see what kind of reporting we can get to show that. Mm-hmm.
So on that note, let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 5, well, a couple minutes after 5.
Yes. Did we not finish everything? Yes. So my only summary comment for the Public Works operating is related to my total increase. Right now, I believe I'm sitting at an increase of 6.3, and that includes transit, the 23% transit increase. And I just wanted to make a note that without transit, my increase would only be 3.2. So So it has a big impact on my bottom line. Obviously, it's a really expensive service, and it is in my division, but the rest of the operating departments are sitting at 3.2 without our growth adjustment applied.
I don't know which one came up first. Do you went up first? Okay, Councillor Darling, followed by Mayor Henderson.
If I may, just as a comment, I'd like to suggest that maybe we look at transit through the CAO and making it a budget line item of its own and not being part of the Works Department budget, because it does reflect a rather negative way on the Public Works Department budget, and the Public Works Director has very little control over it, if any. The Director proposes increases, that's up to us. If there's cuts or where the money comes from, that's up to us. So I don't think it's fair that it reflects so negatively on her budget when it's totally a separate entity upon itself. So I just maybe recommend that we look at this, having staff take a look at it at a further meeting for the next budget.
Thank you, Councillor Darling. Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wilson, my only question is I apologize, I don't know all the technology, but the OPX alarm, is that still in existence, or is that now officially no longer in use? I may be confusing it with something else when I dealt years ago in the budget, Chief, but I remember we had these things at one point, something like this, and they disappeared. Do we still have that?
Through the chair, are you referring to the storm pump stations? The first line of storm pumps?
That's why I'm on, yeah, number
149.
1850 PX alarm line charges.
149.
I thought we're on 149. Am I on the wrong page?
We were just wrapping up the transit part, that's all. So yes, there is still alarm line charges. We share them amongst all of our pump stations. I don't know what the OPX means, but I think it's a contracted service for alarms at the pump stations. It might not be called OPX anymore.
Any questions on that page before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
I don't have any actual notes on this budget. It's pretty much the same as last year, and garbage collection is the same, unless there was any specific questions. Status quo for that, for these sheets.
Okay, let's get into capital. Councillor Beattie has to leave us at 6, so
Okay.
You will find the capital for Public Works on page 30.
So first item is sidewalks. We haven't had sidewalks for the last couple of years, as we all know, the history on this one. So it is back in. Abbott Boulevard is proposed for 2020. We have 200,000 in here. It's a long stretch of road, and it's going to be a challenging sidewalk. So 200,000 should cover it, and it's being proposed to be paid for through federal gas tax.
So that's just for Abbott. I thought I heard a price of 135, but you're just covering to make sure that so you're going to do the whole road.
Yes.
Okay.
Next sheet is the Terry Fox Stormwater Management Pond Rehab. This for a total of 350,000. We had budgeted last year for some engineering design of this pond, or sort of an assessment of the condition of the pond and a recommendation on cost to rehabilitate it. I have to give you a bit of a background because it's such a big number. Obviously, you're going to wonder where this came from. So this pond is at the south end of Tillotson Avenue. It notably did not function properly during that extreme rainfall event in July 2017. It was brought to our attention by GRCA staff at that time that we should really have this pond assessed because it's never been cleaned out. It's almost 30 years old. It's never had any maintenance work to date. So typically for a stormwater management pond, there is very little maintenance besides monitoring the sediment levels. There's a treatment forebay and a big major part of the pond. Typically, everything comes into the forebay and settles out before it goes into the big pond, and then it leaves. So most ponds are recommended to be cleaned out after about 20 years of operation, depending on the size of it. And once, during development, once a subdivision has been built out and assumed by the town, the developer's engineer is supposed to provide a maintenance schedule for the ponds. Moving forward, staff are examining how to better plan for these major maintenance costs so that we're not faced with this type of capital work without any budgeted funding. In 2019, we had approved budget to complete the pond assessment, and that has been completed. And this is where the cost estimate came for the $350,000 in 2020. The function of this pond is twofold. All stormwater ponds is twofold. There's quality control, means to treat contaminated surface water from a development by allowing it to settle in the forebay. The clean water is allowed to pass over a weir into the main pond, where the outlet is restricted to maintain a water level of about 1 meter, and also allowing further settling. The outlet of the pond is restricted to only allow a maximum flow rate out of the pond that does not exceed what would have been released from the site during pre-development conditions. And this is what we call quantity control. So if a pond is full of sediment, neither the quality or the quantity control is happening. And that makes the pond out of MOE compliance. We have to get Ministry of Environment compliance for these ponds, and we are to maintain those agreements. So it is highly recommended that we proceed with this clean out in 2020, because it has been noted for several years that it is an issue. The substantial costs associated with this pond in particular is that it has limited access. We don't build them like this anymore. It's back in a corner with no road, no drying area. Usually you dig them out and you dump the sand, the soil on the side and let it dry. There's very limited space, so it's going to be hard to access with big machines and trucks. So the substantial equipment that's necessary to get in there, dig it all out, and put it in trucks that are sort of waterproof so it doesn't leak everywhere is going to be a bit of a challenge. Also, the sediment that comes out of it is considered contaminated. Anything that's run off the road, oils and greases, are in those ponds, so it is contaminated soil. It has to be dried out and transported to a disposal facility out of town where tipping fees are actually expensive. So it's not going to our typical landfills, it's going further down the road to where you can take contaminated waste. And then, because we've dug out the pond, it all has to be revegetated with plants, trees, and grass. So that is where the expenses come from. It's becoming more and more common for municipalities to have a small annual stormwater charge to help pay for these maintenance requirements. Stormwater charge would contribute to a reserve that can be drawn upon, similar to what the sanitary reserve, to help pay for additional staff needed to maintain the storm sewers and ponds, because currently there is no allocation for stormwater ponds, and also to fund the storm sewer component of capital projects. So currently we have no reserve for road or storm sewer capital improvements, and they're typically funded by provincial OSIF and gas tax. So we will be looking at this type of fee, perhaps, as it's becoming much more common, if not standard practice now for municipalities to have it.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. I know you said Tilson Avenue. Just to help me reflect geographically, can you help quickly just describe where the pond is? Because I know where Terry Fox School and Tilson, I think, is to the south of that. Can you just try to tell me where that pond is? I'm not sure.
Through the chair, it's just north of Elgin, behind the school there. I'm not good at explaining where that is on the road.
If I may, you know where we approved the 23 condos on Elgin Street on the old Hare property, Charlie Hare's property. It's just to the east of that, set back up in those woods there. So it's right by Elgin and where the creek and Elgin intersect, and Tilson comes down around on a cul-de-sac end. It's down in that corner.
Go ahead.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And just listening carefully to your explanation, very detailed, very intensive, I might be asking a silly question based on what you just shared with us, all the steps. Is there any possibility of splitting that over 2 years, or has that become cost prohibited?
Through the chair, I don't think so. No, it's not something we can do in the winter. They'd want to get in and out of there as fast as possible so that the pond can keep functioning. Yeah. and then the replanting of it. So if you're digging out half of it one year, you have a non-planted, like the stabilization of the pond needs to happen right away as well. So unfortunately, no, it's not something we can split up.
I'm guessing there's any type of grants or anything that we could offset that, because it's totally coming out of the levy, right?
Mm-hmm. At this time, yes. So a good point to bring up, though, is that these ponds are also not ever identified in our asset management plan, and they should be. So moving ahead, we will have these ponds in our asset management plan, because most funding only requires that they have to be on your priority list, or else you won't get funds. So
You say every 5 years they need to be
20.
20.
So the next item, bridges and culvert improvements. I've prepared a handout for this one, so just to explain our process for our plan for this capital project. That's handout number 5. And just a quick summary. Back in 2018, we requested GHD, an engineering consultant, to conduct a detailed assessment of 10 of our structures using our pre-engineering fees that we used to have. And these were based off of they're called OSIM inspections, Ontario Structural Inspection Manual inspections that Barry Thrasher had done in 2018. So his reports, which are to be done every 2 years, come out with recommendations. So we handed that to this engineering company and said, please do these more detailed assessments and give us cost estimates of all the improvements that are required. So we have that report, and I've provided you a handout that shows the summary sheets of all the projects that they've recommended. And in 2019, we budgeted $350 for the required upgrades to one of the projects on this list, which was the Elgin Street culvert at Workman Road. But our budget was reduced to $250, and unfortunately, we needed $350 to do that project. So since we didn't have enough, we did $250,000 worth of other projects within that report, and that included University Park, Buck, and Covert Street. So those they were much smaller little upgrades like handrails and some deck work. But unfortunately, we ran out of time, and we've only got the design done for those, and the tender is prepared to go. So we should be able to tender that over the winter and construct it next year within that $250,000 budget from last year, as well as the Elgin Street design, so that we can. Now we have the $325 in our budget for the Elgin Street work in 2020. Sorry.
So what are the major implications if we push all of these forward a year?
Well, they all have their own priorities, and as we know, that one on Elgin doesn't have any guide rails at all, and it's at the bottom of a steep hill where fire trucks and other vehicles have slid off not into the creek, but it does cover the creek. So it's not unusual to have no handrails on the rural roads. It's always been that way, but it's been noted that it's deficient. All of these things that are noted on decks or on our bridges that are deficient it's hard to prioritize. This is my challenge with my capital this year, is we have very many diverse projects, and it was very hard for us to prioritize what's more important than another, because there's environmental, there's safety with the bridges, there's asset management with the roads, there's water quality with the water mains. So I feel your pain. I did try to cut back as much as I could, but it's pretty hard to decide which one is more important than the other when they're all very different priorities.
And I don't mind them taking out of like your wonderful reserves that you have for sewer and other,
Usually.
But you're close to $2 million coming out of the tax levy. So we may have to, adjust that a bit. Mayor Henderson, do you have a question?
I do, Madam Chair. Just in your, it looks like the focus is Elgin Street. When I hear Elgin, I'm just wondering, is the county to be a partner in this at all or not?
Through the chair, this is Elgin Street that is owned by the town. We're east of Brook at Workman is town.
If I may, Your Worship, Elgin Street is County Road 20, which runs to Brook Road and then south on Brook Road, if I'm not mistaken. So anything east of that belongs to us.
Okay, keep on going, Director.
So you'll see in 2021 and 2022, we're still budgeting for more of these projects off of the bridge report, which also includes the King West bridge that we have received funding for. The design of that will start next year.
Given these high numbers, there's absolutely no wiggle room to put any kind of reserve for those upcoming years, so it looks like we're going to bite the bullet for at least a few years.
So the next one is Matthew Street, and this is our highest priority for road reconstructions this year. We did also have Albert Street on the list, which I've moved to 2021. But Matthew was a priority because of the water main. They have poor quality water on this street. They've been struggling with it for quite some time, and it's not something we can keep putting off. So yes, the road is in terrible condition as well, but mainly it's being driven by the water main. I've put a substantial amount of our OSIF funding towards Matthew to offset the costs, and then the rest is from sanitary and a small $56,000 from the levy. Next one is Nagle Road. This is our ongoing EA that Stantec is doing on behalf of MTO. So the payments, you'll see the payment schedule up there. I'm just budgeting for our final payment in 2020, which is mostly covered 75% development charges. Next one is the sanitary sewer rehabilitation. So I've included handout number 6 is a map of all of the sewers in Cobourg, and they're broken out into 5 years worth of studies.
I'm really looking forward to reading this one in particular. Riveting.
Well, is that sarcasm? So this year we started the rehab project. It included, so the rehab of the sanitary sewers that are located in our floodplain areas to reduce inflow and infiltration of groundwater, and thereby reducing the amount of water having to be pumped from our lift stations and treated at the wastewater treatment plants. So this year you'll see the map where we started and where we're planning to go around all the creeks, essentially. We hired SEMA to they provided a staff member with 2 of our public works staff members on our camera truck and our flusher truck. So we were at least able to utilize our own staff to do that work, because otherwise it would have been substantially a lot more cost. And we had a staff member that was trained to be a pipeline assessment certification program, which is a North American standard for pipeline defect identification and assessment. So this is really important for our staff to know how to do this properly. We've always cambered our sewers, and we sort of give it a good, fair, bad sort of condition, but this is an internationally rated system, so contractors understand what it means too. So it just has a lot more value for us to be rating our sewers the same way that everyone else rates their sewers, so that when we have to contract out work to fix them, everyone's talking the same language. So this is a good move for our field staff to actually know how to do this properly. And we intend to train 1 more person this year. So they spent probably 2 months cammering, and all the data went to SEMA, and they are assessing all the repairs that need to be done for those sewers that were done this year, and they'll keep doing that every year. We won't need SEMA staff in the next 4 years. We'll just use our own staff to get the data at least, so it'll reduce the cost of the consultant. I think to date we've only spent $40,000 of this whole project, and again, like I said, it'll be reduced because we won't need SEMA's input as much, and they will come up with $1 million every year of sanitary repairs based on all the data that's collected each year. That is the plan.
Mayor Henderson?
Again, thank you for the explanation. When you said the Brook Road pump station drainage area, so is this going to be specific to that generalized area? Because Brook goes both north and south, just from my understanding. The map was a bit hard to read.
Sorry, it's very small. So through the chair, there's the first little square down here is the bottom end of Brook, and then next year we'll jump up to the top end of Brook, and back down, back up, and back down. So it's a 5-year program for, these are sort of the areas we're going to study each year, and it's three major drainage areas with their major creeks. Yep, the big red square. Oh, those are manholes. Yep, there's a lot.
Director, do we have any more, existing lead sewers or lead pipes? Have we got rid of all those?
Water mains. I believe they are pretty sure that there's no lead water mains within our road allowance anymore. There may be in residences, but not within the road allowance. Sanitary is usually clay, so at some point it fails. So the next one is Kerr Street Extension Division of Darcy is back again, hopefully for the last time. I think everyone sort of understands this one. It's been on the books for a long time, but when it was first approved for budget in 2016, a lot of things have changed since then. As you know, with adding Midtown Creek ponding area, we now have a proper outlet for all the storm water. So the original budget in 2016 was based on ditches in a much more basic design, and now that we've added the stormwater outfall, we're able to put in storm sewers properly. So the extra ask of cost this year is, as I've noted up here, is for full storm sewer, traffic signals, the extension of West Street through the Northern Industrial Park, which is to be funded by Northern Industrial Park, sanitary stubs for future development, and street lighting as well is in there. So there is an increase because there's quite a substantial more work that we're planning to do, and it's happening this year. Finally.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm delighted certainly to see this on the list. I apologize for my lack of engineering. Can you tell me what sanitary stubs are?
It is we have to put a, so it's at Division and Darcy, or at Darcy and, Division and Kerr, and at Kerr and Darcy, we're planning to either stub from one end or the other. So we'll take a little, maybe a short 100-meter piece of sanitary out of the intersection, out of the new works, so that when someone needs to connect to that sewer, we don't have to dig up the road again in the future. So it's a stub just to start the line.
And this is just going underground. Any budget for the road after all this gets in, or will that be another year?
Oh, everything's going in the road and the storm sewer and everything.
Okay. Mayor Henderson, do you have another question?
I do. Apologize. With this, does this also include any changes? I believe it's I think it's Ewart Street, just north of this. Is that included in this, or is that something different?
Through the chair, there's the only changes will be the lights at Ewart will be removed on Division, and there'll be new lights at Kerr and Division. Other than that, it's just West Street is being extended from Ewart down to Kerr Street.
Councillor Darling?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to confirm, I think I've got this straight, but when we developed Kerr Street West from the western portion of it, we're building for lack of a better term, a dam structure to hold back the Midtown Creek going north for the stormwater management pond. So we can't proceed with the stormwater management pond without having the Kerr Street, that portion of it built with the dam in there. Is that correct?
Through the chair, it is sort of the opposite. We need Midtown to go first.
Oh, it's going to go first.
Yep, and that was the intention last year. Is we were hoping to have built Midtown last year, but we ran into permitting issues, and then Kerr Street. But we're planning to tender them both together in January this year. Is the plan, and that'll make it a more attractive contract for everybody to do, for one contractor to do at one time.
Yeah, but if Midtown, the creek north there where the stormwater retention pond, it won't retain any water, will it, until the structure is built? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, from beginning to end of Keir Street, what is the total cost over the foreseeable future? Is it in the 10 millions? With the two bridges over the
Oh, yes, definitely with the bridges.
25? Really?
I think it's like 20,000 a bridge. 20 million a bridge, I mean, sorry.
I would guess, I'm not an engineer, but I know a friend who just put a similar bridge over what we might call Burnham, and theirs was just under 10 million for the bridge. I'm in.
And I guess we really do need this, right?
Yep. Nope.
Okay.
This one is 80% funded by development charges.
Yeah, but it's still money that's being funded by something that could go somewhere else. Go ahead.
So the next one is Blake Victoria Burke reconstruction. We have, this is for design work moving forward. So we're going to always try to be designing the upcoming roads every year and then constructing them the next year. So these are our highest priorities, and also in coordination with Lucy related to water quality issues there as well.
Are there any projects that didn't make this list this year?
Albert Street.
Oh, yay.
Albert and Hardin, actually. I cut two of them. Yep, there. The next one is Shoreline Management Program. So this was the presentation, the public meeting we had just a few weeks ago that is a GRCA project. They had asked us to contribute $20,000, $10,000 per year, and it was budgeted in 2018, and I just didn't have it in last year. So this is the other $10,000 from that should have been in 2019. And that's the end of that project. They are expecting to have that finalized in the spring. Agile transportation is the next one, and if you'll remember back to when I spoke about the accessibility committee, it's the same thing. For whatever reason, this one has always been budgeted in capital, but typically the expenditures have been sort of upgrades, maintenance to some of our paths, which isn't really a special project, I would say, for a committee. This year, the committee is putting forth they put a motion to council for some bike racks. And those are all great suggestions. We're sort of doing it backwards is all, as we're placeholding for those potential projects versus planning for them and asking for them at budget time, so that you know how much you're clearly showing what you're spending all of your budget on versus placeholding and potentially not spending it. So it's still in here, and typically we've used federal gas tax to pay for it, but I just want to put that out there, that if there's something that needs to be cut, this doesn't have an allocated asset to it. It just it's a placeholder right now. Next page is Albert Street, moved to 2021. Next page is also 21. That's the King Street West. That's the funded bridge replacement that will start design next year, 2021. Next one is Hardin Street, which we also moved to 2021. Lucy was in agreement to do this, as they have constraints with their budget as well. Next one's Walton Street, again planning for the future based on our asset management, design in 2021 and construction 2022. And Perry and Green are further down the list for 2022. Page 45, we're into our roads and sewers department capital. They're requesting a storage building. This was something that was part of our Building 7 original plan that was cut out, and right now we use 390 as a storage facility, which isn't the problem we had at 390 was related to storage. There wasn't enough room, and also the public was coming and going with these large vehicles also coming and going, which is still the case. So we use our seasonal vehicles, get pushed down there, and we have our Vector coming and going from there. We have parks equipment being stored down there. We have the boats, the marinas storing them in there, and the bike group are in there. So it's not ideal. It's not that safe for our guys to be driving in and out with all our machines. So they would like to have a storage shed that's, just a pole barn, sort of, not heated, just has some hydro to store our off-season vehicles and materials within our enclosure, like our secure enclosure. And that's proposed to come from the Northern Reserves. And it would also be shared with parks, their equipment. Next one is traffic signal intersection upgrade. We do this every year, or we try to. I just received today a bit of a suggestion, and our contractor is going to be working on making a priority list for us based on his inspections of all of our traffic signals, but he's only been the contractor for less than a year, so he hasn't got quite a good handle on a full list of priorities, but he did mention a few that he thinks are high on his list, and that is the King and Merwin Greer crossing is quite under what it should be, and that's a $50,000 to $60,000 investment. King and Brook intersection, the lights there's a driveway that is in the middle of the lights. There's quite a bit of upgrades that he's suggesting there at $40,000 to $60,000, and also all of our flashing green lights. Last year, you'll note that we have a lot of green arrows showing up now that are sort of confusing, but that is the new standard. All the old flashing green lights are no longer acceptable, so at some point they have to be changed, and depending on the capabilities of all the control cabinets at those intersections, it could be 5 to 10 or even more at some of those locations. So he'll start to make a list of what it's going to require to update those intersections to get rid of the green flashing lights.
Mayor Henderson?
Yes, I'd like to thank you. I know this has been on for some time. It appears ongoing and consistent over the years. Are you working towards, like you've done in many other plans, like an overview of what might be next in the long-term projections? Mm-hmm. Because, I don't see this as a one-off. I see this for some time, and I'm just wondering, are you at that stage where you're putting that long-term plan together on this?
Through the chair, since we have a new contractor, I haven't put thought to a full long-term plan for every signal in town, nor would that be part of his contract, because he's just a maintenance. Like, he fixes things that break, essentially, and then we have special projects like this every year for him to provide input on. I think that we would have to, if we want to do a full-on master plan and capitalize it in a different way, we would have to, he's be capable of doing it, because it's a larger company that's able to do it, but right now we're sort of short-term picking away at smaller projects like this as we can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a thought came to mind. I don't know if this is helpful, doesn't matter, doesn't apply. We get analytics on all our traffic intersections on a monthly basis and what rates, mishaps, accidents, near misses. And some are, as you can imagine, are much higher up than some others. I'm just asking, would that kind of information be helpful to you, or just not really?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of this information. Yeah, I don't receive a report at all about near misses or incidences, or maybe that's something that was done in the past, but we don't receive any reports on.
Well, no, I'm just asking if you think it would be helpful. I don't know if it would be. I'm not here to complicate your life, but I'm just saying we get these, and maybe I'm just to know if it would help if you had near misses and accidents in certain intersections and you found this was applying. Would that help? I don't know.
I don't see why it wouldn't. I would expect that if there is a terrible spot, they would have been on us already to notify us of these areas. And then as this contractor becomes more aware of all the intersections, he generally comes back and tells us right away if there's something that's right out of whack and should be addressed. So we're somewhat relying on him to give us the best recommendations. And yes, it would be helpful to hear from the police if they have such a way to report that to us.
Just to follow up on that, we get a lot of complaints every time one of these new lights goes in because they're different, and I know you've responded to me on multiple times, and I forward that on to whomever is complaining. Is there any simple one-pager or something we can put online that is in layman's terms that people know that these street lights are coming up and what to expect and how to handle the delayed green and the flashing green and the double green arrows, because that seems to be the context of what people are confused about.
I think I could probably craft something based on the emails of responses that I've had to respond to several, and the county may even have some a good explanation as well based on the Elgin and Ontario intersection they did. So I can.
Because that would be really, really helpful, because as soon as a complaint came in or a complaint on the complaint system, then that could be just, sent out as a document to be read, because it is pretty technical. And but I think it's important because I certainly couldn't explain it. But I know I've even got little diagrams drawn by people. This goes here and this goes here, and I go pick them up, and so it'd be kind of nice to have something a little bit more official. Thanks.
I will work on that. Next one is streetlight replacement program. This is exactly the same as last year, so we are doing it, and it's going well with our new contractor. I don't think I need to add anything more. Oh.
Mayor Henderson?
Next one.
Page 147.
47.
47.
Okay, yes, I do. When you indicate, and I understand the program, street lights, are you also being inclusive of parking areas that we own in the town? Because I am noticing terribly that we have a lot of parking areas we own that are either standards done or the lights done, and so I just want to know, is that included as part of this street lights, or is that in addition to? And I'm making reference to both Covert Street and Building 1819 area parking lots. Like, I'm just asking, is that inclusive of this, or is that yet to be something additional?
Through the chair, I'll confirm, but my understanding would be if it's town property, then yes, it would be a streetlight as part of this program. But that might be something that needs to be clarified with the contractor. He may not be aware of that. Next one is the annual paving resurfacing project, which we brought up at council last night. So we always annually budget $300,000. That's paid for through federal gas tax, and I've requested that $100,000 of this $300 be allocated to the 2019 contract. So there will only be $200,000 moving forward in 2020. And something that I do need to update on this one is I had also requested, there was an additional 17. There's 2 extra asks for the parking lot work that was a part of that contract, so I need to update this sheet to show that those additional requests and how they're being funded. So I'll send that to Joanne and get that updated for you.
Can you remind me how much we get every year from the gas tax? Maybe Mr. Davies, you know that on the top of your head?
I have it.
I believe it was $590
$590
this year. This year we got double.
And can we carry that over, or do we have to spend it within the year we get it?
No, we can carry it over.
So do we have a reserve?
Well, I think we've been using.
Sounds like we're using a lot of it this year.
Carried some.
I try to use it up, but there could have been something left over from last year. Next one is HVAC improvements. So this is a building efficiencies fund. There's a report number 7 in your package is the council report associated with this improvement. It's basically to install really large fans in Building 7 garage to increase the air circulation to address heating and cooling deficiencies, as well as reduce the risk of slip and fall injuries. Our garage floor is really flat and wet all the time from our vehicles that come in and sit there and dry. So it is, these fans are going to circulate the air better, cool it better because it's very hot in the summer, and warm it better in the winter because we use radiant heating right now. So it's not the most efficient building, and these fans are actually quite efficient with hydro as well. So it'll resolve a lot of issues.
Mr. Davey, when we get to our budget deliberation, can you give us a summary out of the $619,000 we got? I know that there was this, the organizational review, and a few others as to what the balance is. Thanks.
Next one is a reversible vibrating plate compactor. This is a request from our Roads and Sewers group, and again, as a result of Ministry of Labor initiative regarding ergonomics. The current plate compactor that we have is extremely heavy and cumbersome, and it vibrates. So that's one of our problems with our musculoskeletal diseases, is that they're caused by vibrations. So this piece of equipment, not to mention the old one is really, really old. This one has anti-vibration handles, so it's easier for our guys to use it. They use this for sidewalks. Any kind of compaction you do for gravel, they have to tamp it, and it vibrates to tamp down the gravel, so they use it all the time. It would also, I'd have to see how long it lasts, but it's a piece of equipment that would be around forever, so not short-lived. The next one is Division Street South Storm Pump Station Generator. We currently we have a backup generator for the pumps, but we don't for the building for some reason. So in a power outage, you can't see anything in this building, and if you were to be having to operate in there, you're using a flashlight, or it's not ideal. And not to mention that the pipes within the building could freeze if this was like a freeze-thaw event in the spring or winter. So essentially, we just need a power generator to back up everything within that pump station. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, just to confirm, this is for a new generator, a bigger one to do everything, versus removing the old one and a bigger one to do everything, if I'm reading that?
Through the chair, I believe it's a secondary one. So we're keeping the other one as well. That's my understanding, but
okay.
I can confirm.
There's no way of using the existing one for running the hydro that's there, or just upgrading the size of it?
I'll get back to you with further information on that. So the next few pages are not for 2020. They're just future truck replacements, sidewalk machine replacements, all the way to page 57. Parking meter replacement. We typically tried to budget a small amount every year to replace old parking meters, or replace a bunch of parking meters with a pay and display. So with 15,000, we could do 50 meter heads or 2 pay and display machines. And that is being proposed to be paid for through the parking reserve.
Mayor Henderson?
I'm not sure which one's more advantageous. I know the meters are expensive to repair and they break. You got to collect the coins. There's a lot of work with it, as opposed to the 2 pay and displays. What I'm asking, I remember back when we put in the most recent pay and displays, I somehow remember a figure of 10,000 each for all the. If we're doing 2, that's 20, not 15. I'm just asking, has the price come down?
We did it this year, and I believe it was under the 15,000. Yep.
And if I could ask, if you are going to put this within maybe perhaps a neighborhood, if that's your recommendation, or somewhere starting to go into the neighborhoods, or to have that discussion, which I know I'd like to see, because I know during the summer I went up and down the streets with my dog for a walk, and on average we had between 500 and 600 cars that did not belong to the town of Cobourg, parking on our streets for absolutely nothing. So my answer is, I really feel it is time that they should pay for the service. I don't mean our residents, but I mean our visitors based on license. And if we go that direction, I would encourage to have a public consultation process so we can get everybody's input. I know this is done in many other areas. I'd like to perhaps see we may go there, certainly during the high periods of May to Thanksgiving weekend, because that's a way of recouping, I believe, some of the earned money that we're not receiving over heavy periods through the town. And I'm just basing that on the last 5 years and the numbers that are being attracted to our town for major events in particular. So I'll leave that for the reflection of council, but something I think we need to look at.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, through you to the mayor, if I may add to that. This was brought up when a number of years ago, and it was proposed for Queen and Bay and on Perry in that area, and we actually had money in the budget for pay and display meters, but when it came to council, it was decided that we should wait till the parks waterfront user needs assessment plan come through and looked at parking as a whole. So I think I agree it's time, and this did come to the the Transportation Advisory Committee a month or two ago from a resident, and so the Transportation Advisory Committee is aware of it, and I think we'll be bringing something forward on that in the future.
My preference would be the pay and display, and in moving forward, I think, putting more and more parking meters in here, to your point about they break down and collecting coins, and I know the Honk app has helped a little bit, but you go to Toronto, you never see a meter anywhere. It's all pay and display. Everyone's used to that. If we get a lot of visitors in, and certainly where we are, Lakeshore is just buried with cars, especially during the summer months. And we even have to start looking at CCC, who are constantly showing a deficit, and even we get a lot of visitors there, and you don't go anywhere in any community without expecting to pay for parking. And I think we have to realize that and have that conversation, because it's just the costs are just getting out of control.
And just to follow up with this item, at this point, we're really only proposing to replace some old meters or pay and displays. So expanding it, we could use it for expanding, but we would have to first assess, do we need to be spending it on, taking out a whole bunch of parking meters and putting in a pay and display to replace those, or if we have to replace those meters just because of where they're situated, then we're kind of stuck with that as our only resort. But at this point, it's almost a maintenance related versus an expansion. But it's not.
And
to
that's
say that
basically what the theme of this whole budget is, to replace and refurbish, and certainly wouldn't want to take out good meters.
Right.
But going down the road, that's, I think, the direction we should be going in. It's just my opinion. But those pay and displays really do work, and people
they're
do.
much easier.
Councillor Beattie, you had something?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Director Wills, I do echo the Mayor's observation about high seasons and visitors. My question to the Director is, in our current infrastructure, if I may use that word, is there certain high visited areas and high peak times where we could do pilot projects or pilot initiatives so that we can collect data, comparable revenue, high season to low season, through public consultation? Like, do we have that data and that infrastructure where we could do a short-term pilot to help us make more informed decisions? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
I think it's pretty evident in the numbers, like in our revenue numbers. The high peak is obviously the summer's crazy and there's no available parking down there at any time, really. So I don't know if there's what kind of pilot we would be looking at as far as it might be different. As I've shown actually in the parking increase report, there's a proposal to do tiered parking lots to try and to make the parking lots that are further away cheaper, so that people will park further away and not expect to park right in front of the beach or right in front of where they need to go. That's about all we've got for innovation on our parking side, because we're so limited in space in the really high density area of Cobourg. The next item is transit shelters. As I mentioned earlier, we try to do 2 a year, whether it's constructing a new shelter or replacing old damaged shelters. And we typically go through Accessibility Advisory Committee to see where they would recommend we put the newer shelters. And the last 2 are related to the bus replacements, and they're based on the funding that we hopefully will receive next year. I am proposing the wheels bus replacement next year. This is a great deal of funding, so we can get these at a quarter of the cost. So in 2020, we'll replace our wheels bus that, and like I mentioned last night, it'll be a different style where it's a low floor or has a lift. So that should help with some of the current issues we're having with our existing bus. The backup wheels bus right now has been off the road for many months, and I'm still waiting for the contractor to tell us how much that's going to cost to fix. And then the last item is our conventional bus replacement. So nothing is budgeted for next year. I'll just explain that in 2021 and 22, essentially I'm budgeting for 50% of one bus in 2021 because it takes over a year to get it. So we put down 50%, we receive it in 2022, and then we order 50% of the next bus in 2022. 2023, we receive the second bus, and that's the last 50%. So that's how the funding's broken down.
Do you have an idea? I did a quick calculation of just the annual tax requirement for your capital budget, and I came up with $1,891,623. But do you have an idea with all of the capital expenditures, regardless of where the funding is coming from? I checked 2019, you were up about $5 million and change.
Sorry, what was 5 million?
In 2019, your
My
capital,
total?
your total, yeah.
I don't have my 19 in front of me, but my total for proposed right now for 2020 for Public Works is 1.86 as a net cost.
Everything?
That's the tax portion.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I've got here.
Okay.
But I meant the total with all budget. Oh, Mr. Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Deputy Mayor, keep in mind that what's going to happen in the next step of this budget process is that we'll go through all of these capital projects at the staff level. We'll look for all the possible sources of funding, be it reserves, debentures, any other, whether we've used all the federal gas tax or not, the OSIF, all of that. And when you look back at the 2019 budget, you're right, there was $5.3 million of capital projects with nothing on the tax levy. And in fact, the whole capital budget for 2019, the only part coming out of the tax levy was $154,000. So again, very minimal. Yeah. So there you can see the total projects for Director Will's budget there, proposed for 2020. So again, a lot of that, what's showing as a net cost or coming out of the tax levy, will be funded through other sources.
I'll have to compare that because when I added up mine, it was 1.8, and that's showing 1.3. Is that what I'm reading there? Yeah. Oh, there. There's my 1.8. Thank you. That's it for Public Works. Before we move on to environmental, Councillor Darling, there's a motion on our agenda, if you wouldn't mind reading that. Under Public Works, Efficiencies funding request. It's number 2 on the agenda.
The Public Works Building Efficiency Fund, staff. Public Works Building Efficiency Fund requests, staff report. The action recommended that council receive the report for information purpose and consider as part of the 2020 budget process.
I know. The last section is environmental services. Do you want to do operating or capital first?
Operating, please.
Okay, page 149 for everyone.
Bro, thanks. I don't have page numbers.
At the top that says environmental revenue. Yeah, you got it? Good.
Okay. So the main item on here is your user rates. They increase annually based on our Watson & Associates report recommendations. So that is the increase to our rates. It happens every year. And I guess that's same as the cost of our operations increases every year. So the rates have been increased to accommodate those costs, those increased costs. The energy curtailment item at the bottom, this is sort of a savings for us where Hydro One allows us to go off the grid and save the amount of energy that we normally have to pay for. We get that money back for it. It's a great program, but with all of our capital projects and reducing energy usage through our blowers and more efficient pumps, we won't be receiving as much money as a rebate because we're actually saving it in utility costs. So it's a win regardless. But I know I have an extra under 2019 year to date. Bill told me he's expecting an extra 8,500 here, so the total would be about 19,000 as a 2019 year to date, which is pretty much exactly what we're expecting for 2020. Any other questions on this page? So then 2 pages from there, water pollution control plant number 1. Nothing too much is changing in our operations for environmental services. I'll just note that, again, chemicals, further mid down the page, is we're still expecting those to go down. Our ozone system was not up and running this year, so we had budgeted less, but we're still spending quite a bit in chemicals, and that's chlorine related. So we do want to keep the cost down as a budget request at the 34,000 because we do anticipate again getting that ozone system back up and running this year, which means we don't have to use as much chlorine. down to utilities. We're sitting at 200 for the year. And as part of one of our big projects, there was a power rebate program associated with one of our blowers where we've already received about $50,000 as a rebate, and we're expecting another $50,000 this year. And I just have to confirm with Ian whether that $50,000 comes off our utilities or it has to go towards the capital project. But either way, $100,000 in a power rebate from one blower in 1 year is pretty awesome. That pays for the whole cost of the pump, actually. So our utility bills are going to continually go down. So based on all these more efficient blowers and pumps. Special project noted here. This is something that our environmental officer does every year. She puts together her own special projects of flow monitoring and public education pieces to help make people more aware of what happens when you flush something down the toilet or down your sink. And I think it's pretty important for a community to understand that. So Jen Leno is part of a group called MISUG. It's the Municipal Enforcement Sewer Use Group. She chairs the group, actually, and there's something like 21 member municipalities. They meet quarterly and talk about wastewater issues. And they came up with handout number 8 in your package. I just thought it was cool for you to see these flyers that they come up with. She wants to do a bit of a little scraper that you can, a handout scraper, so you can scrape your grease out of your frying pans and green bin it instead of flushing it down the toilet or instead of washing it down your sink. And just some did you know sort of information. I really like them. I think they're great information and they're colorful, and she'll bring them to the schools and just bring more awareness of what you're flushing down the sewers, because it does affect the plant and it does affect the environment on the outflow. And they even have coloring books.
Can you send us the digital files of those so we can share them?
Mm-hmm.
Those are great.
I can do that. And they have coloring books for kids at the schools too. They have cool stories about the toilets. So that's what this special project is for, is sort of a public education piece for Jen.
We should each have a copy of that coloring book so we can decompress after the budget.
Right. It's a great
meeting.
relaxation. And the final item on this list is a special project for facility condition assessment. This is related to asset management. So we're proposing this to hire a consultant to come to both of our plants and all 5 of our sewer pump stations to do a facility condition assessment that will be added into our asset management plan. So it's not just the major pumps, it's the buildings themselves, all the major components of all those facilities. And we'd like to work with Lakefront Utilities because they have to do the same for their water treatment plant. So we'll try to coordinate with them and do it all as one big project. Don't have anything on the next page to note. Pretty much all the same. And then
Mayor Henderson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. If you could just clarify me about the insurance from 2019 to 2020.
I can take that one if you want. Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the negative number in 2019? So that's just because, again, we haven't allocated the 2019-2020 premiums into 2019, so that's why it's a negative. The actual number will be very close to the 55 that was the budget.
So I didn't have anything else on this page, and then the next 3 pages are explanations for all of those budget items.
Can I just ask on page 2, payment in lieu of taxes, who does that affect? Usually that's a government agency of some kind, or what is that? Here's 40,000.
That's basically, again, that's property taxes. Okay, so these facilities are treated, they're not taxable because they're owned by the municipality, but there is a payment, we have to calculate a payment in lieu of taxes. So some of, well, obviously some of it will go to the county as well.
So after the 3 description pages and the salary page, because there's nothing changed there, onto water pollution control plant number 2. I'll note the other equipment maintenance and repairs account year to date. We're pretty well maxed out, and this is due to, we had 2 water main breaks at this plant. Last year we had one at plant 1. We've also done a few health and safety projects, special projects, adding railings and some non-slip walkways that have been sort of outstanding issues we wanted to get resolved. So I don't anticipate, we don't need to increase this one, but there was some bigger expenditures this year that we weren't anticipating. So, and then you'll also see the utilities is increased this year, and that's also as a result of the water main break that we had this year for extra water costs. Otherwise, pretty much your typical increases or staying the same. Same with the next page, and then the next 2 pages are descriptions, explanations. And we can go right to sanitary sewer pump houses.
Also page 1.
Also page 1. So something to note, our year-to-date spent on the McGill Station maintenance and repairs. We had a significant amount of brickwork that had to be done in the transformer enclosure for that pump station, and then there was a double wall gas tank that we had to replace as that related to a building code issue. So that was a one-off that was not anticipated, but so everybody else is back down to their regular, typical budgets for those pump stations. And then I have a special project similar to our asset management, but it's more of a capacity study, because these stations are getting old. They haven't been reviewed in a really long time, and we have 2 that are right beside each other, and we have a lot of areas, a lot of homes that are, they pump privately. They have little force mains that pump privately, so we'll take a look at those to see if there's any other options to service them with the sanitary sewer, and if there's any upgrades needed to these pump stations. That essentially be the recommendations that come out of this report and can be amalgamated into our asset management plan.
Mayor Henderson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wills, I do want to commend you on this part, and not just because I live in the area, but because I live in the area, I see a lot over the last 35 years. And you're right, that station pump has been there well before I bought our home. And the reason I'm also concerned, because we know we have the development this council's already approved with the Ewart property onto Tay with the 4 residential. I don't know the aspects yet, but I know the property across from Peace Park was sold to a proponent, which is the whole corner lot, which may or may not be developed because of floodplain issues. And then, of course, that area still has original ditches, which isn't always the healthiest. And then, again, I agree with your Cedar Miro Tay Bagot, but I'd ask you might add Ontario Street, because I know proponents have separate septic systems. So I concur with the potential development or lack of development, depending on environmental rules. I think it's a good time to look at that whole area. And I apologize, I can't remember the name of the location. It's a small condo unit on Ontario Street where Councillor Rowden also lives. It's a condo self-contained unit. I'm not sure what their system is. I won't speak to it because I'm not sure. But again, it's been probably at least, I'm guessing, 35 plus years since that whole area has been looked at. So I do want to thank you, because I think it's needed, especially with potential development coming in that area.
So the next page is just a description of those budget items, and we can move to sanitary sewer systems. So this sewers are maintained by our Public Works, Roads, and Sewers group, but the budget obviously is through this the reserves here with the sewer rates. I'll note what I had mentioned earlier about our 2 vehicles that are really mostly used for sanitary. You'll see that there's the 2 new accounts here that budgets for their maintenance every year. So we won't be doing our transfer from Public Works anymore. And also we did have a special project called Vector Truck Auto Rewind. That was an old project, and the title just stuck. So that is where we used to budget for major repairs to the truck if we knew that there was going to be some, but typically we don't. That just comes up and we have to fix them. So I'm deleting that account. We won't need it anymore, and it will all this vehicle maintenance and repairs for that Vector truck will be under the new item. And to account for that, in the transfer to vehicle reserve, we've increased this contribution to $78,000 from $35,000, and that is to accommodate the Vector truck because it hadn't been recovered in the past through sanitary reserves, and that's where it should be paid for when we do need to replace it. And that is it for operations.
Question?
Mayor Henderson?
Oh, I've got it. Thank you. Just for my clarification, town-owned equipment rental, I know is the VAC. Did we purchase that, or did we rent that?
That's ours. We own that. And I think there's usually a journal entry at the end of the year as to how much is charged back. It just happens once a year.
So you're going to move on to capital? Do you have any?
Okay.
Page 3. Sorry. That is, yeah, page 2. Yeah, you're right.
So the first item is a sequencing batch reactor, an SBR expansion. And the last final handout, number 9, is the council report. It's in the council reports format anyway, but it's sort of an internal report that Bill's prepared, so that explains the business plan behind this. We have had it mentioned several times that we're planning for this over the last couple of years for budget purposes, and we had planned on doing a little bit more design work this year. That budget last year I think was $100,000 towards engineering. We're just getting started on it now, but getting started on it means we got a cost estimate, and it's $3 million. So it seems like a crazy amount of money. We already have this tank. This is where we treat all of our landfill leachate and septic receiving. It's a big revenue source. It's a pretty simple structure. It's just a huge, big concrete tank. It's really expensive, but it pays for itself very quickly. And Bill's prepared. You'll see his report, and as usual, it's very detailed and shows just how quickly it can be paid back. We do have a commitment from the county that I'm for. Originally, when we asked for the commitment from the county, we thought the budget estimate was $2 million. So I have a volume commitment from them to cover the $2 million within 10 years, I believe it was, and that's what we've based our debenture program on to pay for this. But since then, the cost is $3 million, so I've gone back to the county and asked them if they can commit to the extra $1 million worth of revenue from them. So I'll wait to hear back from them. But as long as they have landfill leachate to treat, they have to pay to treat it. So hopefully they will continue to bring it to Cobourg and commit to bringing it to us, just so that we can be sure we have that constant revenue. But it's not really there will always be constant revenue from it because everybody around the local area is trying to find some place to bring this type of waste. Not very many facilities are available around here. So I will let you enjoy that report. Move on to the next item. The SCADA program at Plant 1, this was brought to council already for approval. We've noted the resolution number was to pre-approve this $260,000. Similar to our repaving program, we tendered a certain amount of work for the SCADA in 2019, but we tendered 5 steps of this program. So we've sort of pre-approved steps 1 through 4 by the same contractor, so it's consistent. So technically this 260 was already approved, and resolution number is noted there for your reference. The next one is biosolids holding tank repairs. We have 2 of these tanks. They're 25 years old, we believe, and well beyond their years. So we're lucky that they're still there and we don't have to replace them. But there are some repairs required. They're starting to rust through in a few locations. We think it's because people have been throwing stones at them from the train tracks. So we've put up a net to protect them, and then we'll get the tanks fixed. This is for 2 tanks, both tanks to get repaired, I believe. Next one is a sanitary sewer line for the scum trough. Again, this is sort of stemming from a project we tried to do last year. We were over budget when it was tendered. The amount of work was unknown and a little too complicated, more complicated than we were expecting. So the costs were really expensive. So we stalled the project, deferred it to this year. We've budgeted a bit more for it, but it's also simplified because now we're only talking about a sewer line, whereas before we were trying to get a contractor to bid on this scum trough, which is a pretty specialized piece of equipment that no one really has much experience in except for a fabricator or supplier of this thing. So we've bought the scum trough, and it will be installed in our contact chamber at Plant 1, and this $200,000 is just for the sewer works that we didn't have enough money for to do this year. So the sewer is going to connect to the scum trough, and the stuff that comes out of the scum trough goes down the sewer and back into the headworks, instead of us having to wheelbarrow it.
I'm just counting to see how many times you could say scum trough in the last, 3 minutes. I was watching your face to see how much fun that was.
How many did I do? Okay, next one is the standby return pump for Plan 2. Again, a very old pump, 25 years old. We had it budgeted for last year, but had an unexpected digester heat exchanger failure. So we swapped that project out and used the funds for that replacement instead. And so we're rebudgeting again for this pump. Next one is tertiary media filter replacement. Last year we did one side of the tanks at $50,000, and this year we'll do the other side of the tanks. The next one is the solvent shed replacement. This is just a rickety old shed that's been used for storing chemicals, and we just need to replace it to ensure that if the chemicals spill, we are capturing them and they're not leaking out of the shed. It's sort of a spill containment well that's underneath a grate system. So it's a pretty small building, but just a little storage shed that's up to safety standards. Next one is a pump replacement at the McGill pump station. This is the 3rd of 3 that needs to be replaced, and it's over 20 years old.
Sorry, Mayor Henderson.
Oops.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just from my understanding, I hope I have it right, the one in McGill is the one just off by the parking lot, and between that and the trailer park. Am I in the right location or not?
The one right beside Division, at the bottom of Division, is a storm pump station, and then McGill is in the trailer park, tucked in back there. Right?
So it's in by where Y building is? It's the square one where the bricks are like in the corner between the, no? I'm just trying to get a sense. Is it where the parking and we have the YM pool and then we have the square
The pool.
on the edge of the trailer park?
Yep.
So I guess my question is, as I look at this page and the next page, I'm just trying to understand, like, I understand it's time for it to be upgraded, but does that mean you're upgrading the whole entire interior, exterior building, or just for clarification for me to understand?
Sure, through the chair, there are 3 pumps at McGill Street. So one of these items is to replace just the pump. So 1 pump. Yeah, that's a big pump. And so we have, since there's 3 of them, it's likely that 2 of them are probably always running during a major storm, and the third is a backup in case one of those others fail. They can interchange. So to not have that third one would put us at risk of losing. We wouldn't be able to keep up with the flows. And the next one, still at McGill, but this is a really small piece of the station, whereby it's a grinder pump essentially. And if we don't have it doing the grinding for us, we have to capture it in a screen, and it's very manual, where you have to take the screen out, take all the screenings with it, and it's very labor intensive. The next one is an ATP monitoring equipment. This is about the bugs at the plant and monitoring them. So I like to think this is why, part of the reason why we have surcharge agreements with our industries is because if they're exceeding their limits of the bylaw and discharging something to the wastewater that comes to the plants that's toxic to the plant, it kills the bugs. And without the bugs, we can't treat the water properly. So this is a new technology that they're considering trying for the year at least to see if it helps them to prevent all the bugs from dying at once. They do test for it regularly, but sometimes if a slug comes in and kills them all, then there's no way for us to be preventative in saving them. It's more of an online monitoring system versus a spot check system that we do right now. So it may help us to keep those bugs. If they ever die in the winter like they did last year, we run into compliance issues with the MOE, and it's very hard to regrow them again. So it puts our plants out of compliance. So they would like to try something like this to see if they can prevent that from ever happening again. The next one is headworks ventilation system at plant 2. So the wet well is where all the raw sewage comes into, when at the beginning of the plant it's extremely toxic, very corrosive to anything in the air. And I guess the unit is inside that building, so it's exposed to the gases all the time. So it's highly corrosive environment. And this new unit, the makeup air will be outside of the building. It warms the air before it goes in, so that it keeps that mechanical equipment away from the corrosive environment. It's probably a little bit more than just replacing the one on the inside, but because of it being outside, it'll last longer. So. And that is it for 2020. We plan to do a little bit of design work on a second chlorine contact chamber. Currently we only have 1, and we're only required to have 1, but the MOE may require us to have 2, so we'll plan for that design work at the very least so that we're ready to go if we have to actually put one in.
Mayor Henderson.
In the future.
Yeah, just as we're going through the ones for 2021, 22, the only question I have for you is the King Street pump station upgrade. I see it's 2021 for the study, but I'm just wondering, do you want to consider moving that back? And not that I'm trying to add to the budget, but I also know, as I do my daily walks, all Cedar Shore lots are completely sold. The whole unit's sold out. And the only fear I have, if they're already sold out, and obviously they want to start at some point, would it be wise for us to do the study earlier to see if we need the other $500,000 in place so when the homes are built, we're ready to go? So just a thought, because I met the proponent yesterday and every single lot is gone.
Through the chair, I actually do have a note. I crossed it out and said 2020, and that actually is part of the capacity study that was mentioned in the operating budget. So I think I can update this so that it doesn't show the 10,000 in 2021, just the proposed capital for any upgrades required for 2022. So the study will be part of, that's the Monks Cove one. That's already included in the operations budget. And that's it.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you for your patience, Madam Chair. On behalf of council, I'd like to compliment you, Director, because I know how much work Public Works is. It's a huge division. Every year I'm here, I learn even more. And I really, as a member of council, and I'll go home and read these again, but I do appreciate you taking the time with your staff to put in what we might call at least a report or justification report that allows us to see your thinking. I can only appreciate how much time that was on top of the budget, but I'm speaking for me right now. I appreciate receiving that kind of material because I've always said before, the better I understand it, the better you have my support. So thank you for doing that.
And just as a follow-up to that, this is one of the main reasons I wanted all of council to sit in on this. I know it's long, and I know it's extra work for you, but at this point, they can hear it directly from you. They can ask questions. We can all ask questions. Just getting all of this information on one day just can't ever work because it's just, we learn all this. You know, this is pretty complex, and kudos to you for understanding all this and making it user-friendly for us because it's huge and the numbers are huge and we need to know what the numbers can do for the town. So moving on with the budget, next we have Committee of the Whole Open Forum, and of course we have a capacity crowd here today for this budget, but I don't see anyone coming forward to the podium. So does any member of council wish to go into closed session? Seeing none, I will call for an adjournment. Councillor Bureau, we are adjourned.